Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Had Siblings and a Multiverse Quirk? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. I'm sorry, did you just refer to my brother as a Deku? Yumu asked politely and the boy stood up. Who the hell are you? He demanded and Izuku sighed. Yum emu, Bakugu Katsuki, Yum emu. My sister. Shut up. We've been up since 6, it's too early for this, he said and Hitoshi pursed his lips before taking a deliberate sip of coffee. What the F dash, Izuku? Oh, look at that, he did know Izuku's name. And this is Aizawa Hitoshi, Izuku said and breezed through the door. You already know Aki. Hitoshi, see my desk anywhere? Where's Ko? Not here yet, Hitoshi said and pulled his phone out of his pocket to check his texts. He's right behind us. Oh hey Koji. Yumu called down the hall and waved at Koji, speeding towards them with his hands moving a mile a minute. Hi Yumu. Am I late? Koji asked and Hitoshi waved. Nah, Hitoshi called as he joined their little party. Oh great. Izuku was behind this Bakugu kid. Second seat, far row by the windows, Yumu said to Izuku and he let his hand brush along the desks, counting the rows before coming to a stop next to Bakugu. You're right behind me, nerd, Bakugu said, and wow, this was a variety of things happening at once. Hitoshi yawned into his trusty travel mug, freshly topped off with Dad's coffee. Morning, Tenya, he said and took stock of his classmates. It looked like they were the last to arrive. He recognized a few of them from his practical. There was that girl with the gravity quirk who narrowly missed getting pinned by rubble, that boy with the naval laser or whatever was going on with that, the electric boy. Hitoshi hadn't gotten any names. He wasn't exactly a people person. Some kid with a bird head was sitting on a desk, surrounded by a freakishly tall kid with wings and ears and mouths, another girl beside them with earphone jacks dangling from her earlobes. Off to the side was a girl who held herself very properly with a very extensive ponytail, another girl with pink skin, some kid with bright red hair hanging by her, a girl with what was obviously a frog quirk, a guy with candy cane hair who seemed intent on not interacting with anyone. The question was who was the other recommendation student? Floating uniform. Had she been at his testing site too? It was hard to notice an invisible person. She seemed busy, if the waving of her uniform arms were anything to go off of, talking to a guy with a big butt tail that was very red. The last person was a plain-looking boy with bulging elbows. Oh, you all already know each other. The gravity girl piped up and Hitoshi blinked at her. Yeah, he replied shortly, and watched in something akin to amusement as her eyes zeroed in on Yumu, making her way to her desk with Koji, who was blessedly placed near her. Dad had evidently put Izuku and Hitoshi far apart, not wanting to deal with their bullshit, and Hitoshi honestly couldn't blame him. I saw you at my testing site. The girl blurted and he focused back on her. Yeah. Noticed you too. I'm Uraraka. Who? Aizawa. So, she was still focused on Yumu. Did you all go to the same school? Something like that, he replied. We should probably get in our seats. Oh, right. The girl jumped and made a beeline to her seat, which was conveniently right next to Yumu. That was going to be fun to watch. Hitoshi filed it away for future teasing purposes. If you students came here to make friends, you're in the wrong course. Dad's voice broke through the chatter and Hitoshi gave him a side eye. He knew Dad liked to terrify his students on the first day, but did he have to do it in a sleeping bag? This was embarrassing. Keep your sheet up and I will give you something to be embarrassed about. Maybe they shouldn't have complained so much about being in his class. Everyone froze as Hitoshi just barely rolled his eyes and made his way to his seat. Dad unzipped his sleeping bag just enough to polish off his jelly packet before he rose up and unzipped the whole thing. I'm your homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shoyuda, he droned as Hitoshi slumped into his desk. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down. You're not rational enough. The only students in class that did not react were Hitoshi and his siblings and Tenya and Koji. There was visceral horror at the revelation, and Hitoshi buried his head in his arms. I've never seen a pro hero look so worn out before, someone whispered near Hitoshi and he scoffed. He had seen plenty of pros look entirely wiped out. It's just most of them gave more of a F than Dad. Dad didn't care. This is sudden, but put these on and meet me on the field, Dad said, and Hitoshi peeked out of his arms to look at the gym uniform he pulled out of his bag. Your uniforms are under your desks. Go change. And with that he was dragging himself out the door. Hitoshi was surprised they hadn't been used for free labor to get the uniforms into position. Was this where Dad had gone for that 10 minutes Hitoshi had spent stealing his coffee? He pulled his uniform out from beneath his desk and got up, making his way for the doors. Where do we change? Someone asked. Changing rooms are this way. Yumu called and the class scrambled to follow her. Hey! The red-headed boy said as he jogged to catch up with the three siblings. Sorry, I didn't catch all of your names, but wasn't it said your name was Aizawa? Yeah, Hitoshi grunted. He wasn't expecting the question this fast. Do you know our teacher? Is he really a pro? He asked and Hitoshi resisted the urge to cringe. Yeah. He's a pro, he replied shortly. Was he going to be accused of favoritism so quickly? So is he like, I've never seen him before. Is he underground? He doesn't look old enough to be your dad, so is he like your cousin or something? You kinda ask a lot of questions, dude, Hitoshi said and cast him a weird, sidelong glance. Oh. The red-headed boy flushed deep red. I'm sorry, that was so unmanly of me. I'm Kirishima. Sorry. Didn't even introduce myself. Cool, Hitoshi replied, rather coolly himself. Sorry, I'll just... He's not my cousin, Hitoshi interrupted. And he's an underground pro. Oh, cool. Izuku elbowed Hitoshi and Hitoshi gave him a baleful look he couldn't see, but Hitoshi was certain he could feel. What? He asked flatly. He's just curious, you don't have to be all, I'm going to pretend I'm cool and don't like people so no one knows I'm terrible with people, Toshi, Izuku said and Hitoshi rolled his eyes. Says the one who almost got. In a fight the second you entered the classroom, he shot back and Izuku bumped him. Not my fault. Anyways, hi, Kirishima, I'm Sasaki Izuku, this is my sister, Sasaki Emu, but we all call her Yumu. Hi. Yumu said brightly. It's nice to meet you. Hi. Kirishima said. This is Ashido. We went to Mustafa Middle School together. Where did you guys go? Yoyogi Middle School, Izuku replied. But we switched to homeschooling when we moved to Mustafa last semester. Oh, Ashido said and Hitoshi crinkled his nose. Yoyogi was in one of the more affluent areas of Tokyo, which was saying a lot, because Tokyo was affluent to begin with. Wait, and they already effed up. Girls' room is right here. Yumu said brightly. Boys is right down there. You guys really know your way around, huh? Ashido asked in shock, and Yumu shrugged. Not hard to memorize the map. Let's go. And then she was whisking off to the changing room with the crowd of, wow, were there only 7 girls? Then again, they were only 3 off from there being an even amount of boys and girls, but that was awkward. Yumu led the girls into the changing room and got to work, kicking off her indoor shoes and pulling off her clothes as quickly as she could, because Dad did not like lollygagging. Girl time. Ashido squealed and Yumu blinked a few times. Girl time? Right. Like when she hung out with Namuri and Auntie Aika and Auntie Botton. Girl time when they were naked, though? Yumu didn't really interact with her fellow classmates when she was in middle school. She was the weird girl that always had 3 guys hanging around her, though Izuku didn't count because he was her brother, with a weird quirk, and her only female friend was strange at best. She wasn't in any clubs because of the after-school training, which was honestly just cram school, and girls in middle school tended to form cliques. Then again, wasn't Yumu in a clique? By definition, it was just a closely knit group that didn't really accept other people readily enough. Then again, no one had really tried. They were friendly with their peers, but for the most part they looked really weird to all their classmates. Koji was the only one open about his quirk. Everyone knew they were training for a heroics course. Izuku was a weirdo, Hitoshi was abrasive and Mei was unhinged, to most people. We should probably just hurry to the field, Yumu said carefully. Wow, Sasaki, you're muscular. Ashido exclaimed as Yumu pulled on her pants and readjusted her tank top under her uniform shirt. You looked so tiny when you walked in. I train a lot, Yumu replied by way of an answer. Martial arts and parkour. That's so cool. The invisible girl squeaked. I'm Hagakure Toru, by the way. Hi, Hagakure. Yumu chirped. Sasaki Yamimyu, nice to meet you. I'm Azui Tsu, but call me Tsu, Karo, the frog girl with an adorable bow in her hair said. Yumu was just beyond glad she had the sense to shove socks in her pocket before she went out the door. She didn't want her stockings all sweaty. Sitting down, she pulled on the athletic socks and grinned at how nicely they gripped her instep. It was the little things. Gyrakyuka, the girl with the stylish, punk sort of bob said, and wow, were Tsu and the tall girl the only ones with long hair? Ashido Mina. Ashido said. I'm Uraraka Ochako. Uraraka said. It's nice to meet everyone. Yairozu Momo, the tall girl said smoothly. It's a pleasure. It's rare that a hero course class is almost half female. We must all be pretty kick-ass. Uraraka said happily and pumped her fists in the air. Our teacher is going to be pretty upset if we don't hurry, Yumu said quickly, and gods, this was going to be a nightmare, not slipping up. Why did polyamorous relationships have to be so complicated? Then again, she wouldn't want to claim dad after that entrance. How mortifying. Poor Hitoshi. Right? What do you think we're doing on the field? Something important, if we aren't heading to orientation, Yumu said dryly. Let's go. I bet we can beat the boys. Hey, Sasaki? I didn't see your brother on the rankings they sent in the video, Uraraka said awkwardly, and Yumu pulled on her indoor shoes and stood up. He was recommended. I opted to take the entrance exam. Our papa didn't think it was the appropriate time to test Aki in that kind of crowd, Yumu said and popped her neck before cracking all of her knuckles. Uraraka watched her with wide, wide eyes. Aki? Is that the guide dog? Yeah, Yumu replied. It's honestly a pity he didn't take the entrance exam. If Aki managed to pull through, Izuku probably would have taken the top spot. And with that statement, Yumu was sweeping out of the room, leaving everyone wondering just what kind of quirk Izuku had. They definitely weren't going to find out today. Even with stopping for their outdoor shoes, the girls did, in fact, beat the majority of the boys to the field. Dad was standing there, attaching the reader to his phone, and he gave Yumu the stink eye for not arriving before anyone else, since Yaoyorozu came with her, and the red and white-haired boy got there before them. Yumu just gave him her trademark sunshine smile and dropped into her stretches. What are you doing? Yaoyorozu asked, and Yumu blinked up at her. We're outside in gym uniforms. Obviously we need to stretch, she replied, and Yaoyorozu blinked. Oh, I was homeschooled. I didn't realize these are... Didn't you watch TV? Yumu teased. Come stretch with me. Of course. Yaoyorozu said and joined Yumu into Yumu's basic warm-up routine as the other students started to filter down to the green. The boy with red and white hair stretched by himself off to the side, and Hitoshi plopped in front of Yumu so the two of them could brace their feet against each other's ankles and take turns pulling each other flat. Yumu's back popped and she let out a sigh of relief. You didn't do your stretches this morning, Hitoshi said accusingly. I couldn't find my bobby pin. Yumu retorted. You have like 300 bobby pins? How do you always lose them? Hitoshi asked. Carefully. Yumu stood back up and snapped her hair tie off her wrist to wrap up her hair into something that might constitute a ponytail. And I do not have 300 bobby pins. It's more like 200. Probably. It could possibly be 500. I'm telling Kazan. I will throw you across this field, Yumu threatened as Izuku finished up his stretches with Aki and strolled up to them. Classmates are going to think you two are feral if you keep it up, Izuku said lazily. They already think we're feral, Yumu replied as Koji finished his heel touches and joined them as the last student came rushing in. He was the tall one with the wing things. Yumu could understand why he was late. The uniform shirt looked a little tight around his extra appendages. They hadn't gotten the measurements right. 10 minutes, Dad drawled as he arrived. We'll have to work on that. Shuji, if your shirt doesn't fit, let Present Mike know and he'll work with the uniform service to get you new ones. Your ponytail is crooked, Hitoshi whispered to Yumu and she elbowed him in the gut. Shut up, she hissed. If you're all done gossiping we can get started, Dad said dryly. We're doing a quirk apprehension test. Sir? Dear gods, this was going to be so weird. Dad being called sir? The brown-haired girl raised her hand awkwardly. Don't we have orientation? UA has a freestyle education system, which means I can skip orientation if I want. It's not logical and a waste of time, Dad said flatly. And I don't like wasted time. You all took physical evaluations when you were in middle school, but the education department didn't allow quirk usage. It's not logical. We're rectifying that today. Same tests but you use your quirks. No. Dad was on his logical pedestal again. As if he couldn't be more embarrassing. Bakugu. You came in first place on the exam, Dad said shortly and tossed him a ball with a band wrapped around it. Bakugu caught it and blinked. Yeah, he said with a grunt. Step into the circle and throw this as far as you can. Use your quirk, Dad ordered and Bakugu scoffed lightly before walking into the circle and winding back. Die! Bakugu roared, and a massive explosion lit the field up with orange as the reader on Dad's phone whirred and beeped. 705 meters, Dad read out and everyone broke out into chattering, Kirishima again declaring it manly. He must have a complex, excitement and wonder overtaking the field as Bakugu slunk back out to the group. Oh, this sounds like fun. Ashido squealed as the class burst into murmurs and Yumu barely resisted the urge to facepalm. Great. Fun. Dad repeated severely and Yumu scrunched up her nose. You think this is fun? This is the heroics course. You're not here to have fun. Last place gets expelled, since you don't want to take this seriously. The field exploded and Yumu quietly sighed as Koji shifted awkwardly next to her. But that's not fair. Uraraka exclaimed and Yumu rubbed at her eyes, preparing herself for the age-old lecture on what is fair in heroics. Fair? You think the life of a hero is fair? Natural disasters, villain attacks, none of that is fair. Sacrificing your body every time you go out to save a life isn't fair. Never knowing when the next day is going to be your last isn't fair. If you want fairness, step up now, and I will gladly send you to Gen Ed, Dad barked and the class fell silent, shifting awkwardly. He gave them a severe glare before turning to Izuku. Sasaki, have Aki go get the ball please, he said and Izuku nudged Aki. He'd have to sniff him, he warned Dad and Dad shrugged. Just get the ball please. Bakugu, let him sniff you. Bakugu huffed and slouched over to Aki, letting his hand reach out for Aki to sniff it. Go get the ball please, Izuku said and Aki buried his nose into Bakugu's hand, sniffing hard, smearing his wet nose all over his wrist before taking off at an easy lope in the direction of the ball. Now, let's start, Dad said with an evil grin, and Yumu sighed. Her quirk was going to be useless for this. The most she could do was impede other people, and that just wasn't cool. Her hands flexed in her gloves and she prepared herself for a long day. At least she could probably keep herself a few spots above other students. The tests were a breeze, honestly. Yumu had spent a lot of her independent training on building her endurance. She could run at a dead sprint for at least 30 minutes, and if she paced herself she could go for at least an hour and a half without needing to stop. Dad had hauled down water bottles for everyone, so she didn't have to worry about dehydration. Out of the 3 siblings, only Hitoshi used his quirk. Tenya had just sighed when Hitoshi turned to him and asked if he could use his quirk, barely got through his reply before Hitoshi ordered him to pick him up and carry him. Shuji carried him through on the grip strength test, Hitoshi placing his hand over his and looking Dad dead in the eye. Yaoyorozu was smart. Possibly too smart, but Yumu appreciated that. In terms of endurance, Yumu beat out everyone there but Yaoyorozu. Yumu just kept running and running, not worrying about times or anything like that, and Dad eventually told them both to stop. Yumu was impressed that not only did the girl have the schematics and chemical compounds of a Vespa memorized, but she could actually ride one. A motorcycle, apparently, took too many lipids, but she could ride one of those, too. Yumu's brain was already swirling at the connotations of her quirk in relation to her body. She was spending too much time with Izuku, but her gut told her Yaoyorozu should have more weight on her. Not a whole lot, because with her quirk the drastic weight gain and loss would be hard on her body, but she should definitely be beefier. It was clear she'd been training a lot. Examining the quirks around her was fun. Bakugo had clearly been training hard, his arms were massive, and he had to be taking calcium supplements because there was no way he wasn't constantly dealing with stress fractures in his wrists. Uraraka was clever with her quirk, lightening her clothes to let her run faster in the sprints Yumu still beat her at. Tsu was just precious, she was going to be a fan favorite with kids, and with a little strength training her kicks were definitely going to be Mirko levels of killer. Yumu had to wonder if her skin secreted poison. It was something worth wondering at, because Yumu needed skin contact for her quirk, and she had to worry about these things. Ashido's quirk was pretty great, but dear gods, did Yumu hope she was good at chemistry and could control the level of acidity? Those poor shoes had to be expensive. Jiraiya was in Yumu's boat and couldn't use her quirk a whole lot, unfortunately. Hagakure was struggling, but Yumu had a feeling she was tricking out the sensors, which still counted as using her quirk, and Dad definitely noticed and said nothing. The ball throw test was going to be a mess. Yumu could already tell. She threw the ball pretty hard, earning herself a solid 90 meters. Already people were murmuring, wondering when she was going to show her quirk, and Yumu ignored it. Some people were giving Hitoshi sidelong glances, visibly uncomfortable even though Tenya and Shuji did not seem to give two sheets. Izuka hadn't lifted his visor yet. Koda Koji, Dad said, and Koji shuffled into the circle before turning to sign rapidly at Dad. I don't have a problem with it, but ask Izuku, Dad replied with a shrug, and Koji turned so he could sign at the clump of siblings. Can I use Aki? Yumu translated and Izuku shrugged. Make him look good, was all he said, and Koji nodded several times before taking a deep breath. He hadn't used his quirk yet either, but he trained independently with the siblings and kept up on it when they moved away from Tokyo, so he was at the middle of the bottom of the pack with Izuku and Yumu too. Aki, he whispered. Please catch the ball and run as far as you want in a straight line. Aki stiffened and then broke into a dead sprint as Koji threw the ball high into the air. The dog's eyes zeroed in on the ball and everyone broke out into murmurs that he wasn't going to catch it. Hitoshi huffed out a laugh next to Yumu, who rolled her eyes. Don't ruin the surprise, she whispered, and then Aki jumped. Aki had trained just as much as them, and he was a beast. The average board-treeing walker hound without enough stimuli could jump a good 6 feet, but Aki's record was 10, and Yumu was pretty sure he was reaching that height as he leapt through the air to snatch the tiny ball up and hit the ground easily to keep bolting towards the tree line and disappear. Everyone waited a good 10 seconds as Koji twisted his hands anxiously in the circle. Dad sighed as he kept watching the reader on his phone. This is why I told you not to skip the morning run, Izuku, Hitoshi whispered, and Izuku shrugged. Something told me I shouldn't, he replied smugly. Is it going to come back? The boy with the tape in his elbows asked awkwardly. And he's got a lot of energy to burn, give him a break, Izuku replied. We're going to be waiting a while. He can really jump, Kirishima said in awe. That's a manly dog, dude. Aki is the best, Izuku said firmly. He's trained as a guide dog, attack dog, bomb and drag sniffer, and in sniffing out people in a disaster zone. Wow. He's really smart, the electric boy said. Yeah. He's great, Izuku said with a big grin on his face as Dad rubbed at his eyes in exasperation, because Aki was still going. He's definitely having fun right now, Yumu commented with a little laugh. What's your quirk, dude? Kirishima asked Koji, who awkwardly scratched behind his head. Animal whisperer, Hitoshi supplied. He can politely ask animals to do things for him, and for the most part, they listen. Mainly because they like him. Oh wow, that's really useful. What a cool quirk. You should see the things he can do with crows, Yumu said slyly, and Koji flushed bright red. Don't tell them about that. He protested to Hitoshi's translation, and Dad narrowed his eyes on them. There had been a unanimous decision that he would never hear of the Tone incident. He'd really straightened up, even made it into Shiketsu, but the crows had definitely been a humbling experience for him. Yumu was pretty sure he'd developed a healthy fear of birds after that. 1742 meters, Dad droned out and everyone blinked. He ran that far? Someone gasped. He runs about 13 kilometers every morning with me and Yumu, Izuku said with a shrug. He likes running. You've got a healthy workout schedule, dude, Kirishima exclaimed. Yumu's lips quirked. He didn't know the half of it. It was a workout in and of itself to get Hitoshi out of bed to join them with Dad. It took a while for Aki to return with the ball, and in that time they went through 4 separate people. Shuji had one hell of an arm, and when Uraraka stepped up, Yumu squirmed in excitement. Looking up at the sky, the girl wound up her arm and just gently tossed it up. The ball floated and floated and floated until it just disappeared. Dad's phone made a weird noise and he sighed before turning it back around. Infinity, he said, and Bakugu made a weird noise while Hitoshi whistled lowly. Aki came jogging back up, happily slobbering all over the ball, which he dropped at Dad's feet and looked up at him with his tail wagging steadily. Dad stared down at him in silence and the class snickered quietly. What? He asked flatly, and Yumu took delight in his hand twitching. He really wanted to throw that ball for him. Aki heel, Izuku ordered even as Yumu coughed into her hand. He shouldn't have taken pity on him. Sasaki, you're up, Dad said. Which one? The two chorused as one and he gave them a sidelong glare. The one that hasn't gone yet, he replied sharply. Izuku grinned and flicked up his visor, and oh, he was finally getting into his quirk. Moving forward without Aki, he found his way into the circle as the ring around his irises flickered a mile a minute, glowing bright in the morning sun. Dad handed him the ball, didn't toss it for once, and Izuku tossed it up and caught it once before pausing and letting out a bright, disbelieving laugh. Before you get mad at me, this is a 98% success rate, he said and suddenly turned as his eyes lit on fire. And then he chucked the ball right at Bakugu's face. Chaos struck as Bakugu let out a noise between a yelp and a F dash, and lifted his hand on instinct, his quirk firing off to send the ball soaring into the air as Dad visibly bit back a groan. All of the students started exclaiming, some swears went around, and the reader beeped. 706 meters, Dad drawled and frowned at Izuku. Don't pull that sheet again. Deku, what the F dash? Bakugu screeched and stomped towards him, explosions firing off, and Dad reacted on instinct, his scarves wrapping around Izuku and yanking him back as his hair lifted up and eyes lit up to cancel out Bakugu's quirk. Bakugu pulled to a stop, spluttering. Not saying Sasaki should have done that, but try to keep brawls to a minimum and not in front of your teacher, Dad said dryly. Sasaki, cleaning duty. What did you do to my quirk? Bakugu demanded. I cancelled it, Dad replied, and Uraraka perked up. Oh my gods, your eraser head. She hissed and Dad blinked, effectively giving Bakugu his quirk back. His hair fell down. And he released Izuku with an irritated huff. Wait, did he even use his quirk? Kirishima asked in confusion. Yes. Ju, you're up, Dad replied, hell-bent on getting the class moving. Yumu didn't blame him. Getting clocked by a student on the unofficial first day after someone tried to attack your kid after your kid threw a ball at his face when the kid kept calling your child useless had to be one hell of a ride. Was Yue always so chaotic? She didn't remember his last class being this messy. Also, the student had no idea he was insulting someone in front of their parent, who was also his teacher. This was a mess. The rest of the tests moved along and Yumu kept a suspicious eye on that Bakugu kid, who evidently was heated over a great many things, judging from that awful personality. He had been glaring at Izuku since he walked into the class, but now he was flat out refusing to look at him entirely. Yumu wasn't sure why that even mattered. Izuku had no way of knowing if Bakugu was looking at him or not with his visor down, but whatever. She was going to get a chance to pulverize him eventually, and she was going to relish it. Izuku didn't talk about his time before he came to Papa, but she knew it wasn't exactly a happy time outside of Inko, and she had a pretty good feeling this kid had something to do with it. When Dad pulled out the scoring at the end of it all, Yumu was pleasantly surprised to find herself decently close to the middle of the pack. But the numbers didn't add up, and Hagakure was on the bottom. The girl was right next to Yumu, shaking slightly, and Yumu bumped her shoulder. Dad wasn't going to expel her. It wasn't her fault she didn't have as much training as everyone else and had a difficult quirk. She had room to grow. No one's going home today, Dad said over the quiet murmurs. It was a logical ruse to get you to pull out your best. The scoring made no sense, and he clicked it off before anyone could do the math and question what he was actually judging them on, which was a combination of factors. The scores were the main point, which was why Yumu wasn't up higher, but he also rated students based on the level of training they showed, quirk creativity, which was a big fat 0 for Yumu because she hadn't used hers, innovation, and that secret potential she thought was utter bullshit. He probably gave all the siblings and Koji an average scoring on that, because favoritism could really leak in on that. What? The class exploded into outrage and indignation, and Yaoyorozu furrowed her brows. Wasn't it obvious? She asked curiously. Of course he wasn't going to expel anyone before the semester even started. Yumu didn't have the heart to tell her he'd once expelled an entire class on orientation day. Every last one of the students, even Bakugu, had rescue points, and a lot of them. It meant something. He wasn't going to just kick anyone this time around. That's all for today, Dad said gruffly. You all can leave. Be back in time for homeroom tomorrow. The class broke, still evidently feeling discontent at the whole thing, and Yumu fell in step between her two brothers as they all made their way to the first year's Gen-Kan and the changing rooms. You didn't use your quirk, Hitoshi finally said, and Yumu snorted. What was I gonna do with my quirk in this scenario? She asked flatly. Just ruin everyone else's scores? He didn't say we could attack anyone to get ahead. Hitoshi agreed, and Izuku bumped Yumu's shoulder. She gave him a measured look, debating on asking just who that Bakugu kid thought he was to Izuku, and decided against it, mainly because the kid in question was right in front of them. There was an interrogation in order later. Should we just head home or wait for them? Well, I apparently have to clean the classroom, Izuku said dryly, and Yumu snorted. Should have thrown it harder. Bakugu glanced over his shoulder, eyes narrowing dangerously, and Yumu gave him a sharp smile that promised daggers in his future. He scoffed and looked ahead again, likely dismissing her because she clearly didn't have a good quirk, and oh boy, she could not wait for the chance to go toe-to-toe with him. Those explosions were big and powerful and fast, but that didn't mean shit if he thought he could get close to her. She was going to eat him for breakfast. It didn't take long to reach the changing rooms, and Yumu found herself in a gaggle of girls hell-bent on making friends, which she didn't really mind. She knew her and her brothers, and their only two friends they straight up just shared with each other had a bad habit of getting too exclusive. Sasaki, why didn't you use your quirk? Uraraka asked curiously as Yumu pulled off the overshirt and folded it up. She'd need to take the uniform home and wash it. It didn't smell like her detergent. Wouldn't have worked for anything, Yumu replied with a shrug. It only works in certain scenarios. It only works on living, sentient things went unsaid, because people were already pretty anxious about Hitoshi's quirk, didn't need to know Yumu's was even creepier. But some of the boys were. The girls all seemed pretty decent about it, not even batting an eye. Only Siro, the tape boy, was obviously jumpy about it, but he hadn't glared at Hitoshi or anything, just squirmed a little like he was conflicted on how he was supposed to feel. Maybe because Hitoshi was using other people to get his scores. Yumu was going to have to keep an eye on that one. Hitoshi had also gotten the most rescue points on the exam. To be exact, he had 42. Yumu had coasted in on 37. Everyone could see their scoring, so everyone knew Hitoshi was a good guy. Is it a 5-point touch quirk? Uraraka suddenly asked and then flinched. I noticed your gloves. I have to wear them when I sleep. It is, Yumu confirmed as she buttoned up her top. Thank gods for artist gloves. Fumbling with buttons with regular gloves on was a pain. The tie was tightened and she tucked in her shirt before casting about for her stockings. I thought the way you used your quirk was pretty cool. Oh, thank you. Uraraka squeaked. You did really well for not using your quirk the whole time. Do you have training? Yeah. Me and Izuku trained with Hitoshi, Yumu said. They trained for 6 years, I've been training for about 3 or so. So, Sasaki, Yaoyorozu piped up. Forgive me if this question is intrusive, you don't have to answer, But you mentioned that your brother was recommended? Yeah. I wanted to take the entrance exam with everyone else, but Papa put his foot down with Izuku, Yumu answered. If you don't mind my asking, who recommended him? Does your father have connections to heroes? Yumu raised an eyebrow at that as she loosened her hair and shook it out. Definitely time for a wash. What makes you think my papa isn't a hero? She asked dryly and Yaoyorozu blinked. Oh, he is. Who's your dad? Ashido asked, butting into the conversation as Yumu sat down to roll on her stockings. The question almost made her snort. Her dad just gave the entire class an existential crisis like the a-hole he was. My papa is Sasaki Mirai. Sir Knight I, Yumu replied. And her pops was Present Mike. And her dad was Eraserhead. She was starring in a shoujo, she was certain of it. You could hear a pin drop. Every girl in the room just stared at Yumu as she kept pulling on her stockings without a care in the world. Your dad is the only sidekick All Might ever worked with in Japan. Hagakure asked and then squealed. Oh, wow, I thought it was cool that I was going to school with Endeavor's son, but that is so much cooler. What is All Might like? Yumu winced at the question. She desperately just wanted to say he was a BSTRD that broke her papa's heart, but she couldn't exactly do that. I've never met him, she answered shortly as she got her shoes back on. Papa hasn't seen him in 6 years. That was another annoying thing. People only knew her papa because of All Might, but he was a brilliant hero in his own right. His capture rate was astronomical, but because he wasn't on the news, being flashy and wild and dragging out fights for ratings, he wasn't cool. Heroes relied on him for the information he and his 2 sidekicks gathered, but because he kept operations small, everyone assumed he wasn't well off. It wasn't about quantity, it was about quality. 6 years later, and Papa was still in All Might's shadow. It was frustrating to watch. Oh, should I not have asked that? Hagakure asked awkwardly, and Yumu forced herself to flash her a disarming, bright smile. No, it's okay, you're just curious. Everyone wants to know about All Might, she said, even if it physically grated her to say it. The only thing she wanted to know about All Might was if he was still doing his DMN job and staying away from her papa, the way he should be. And now he was going to be one of her teachers. Aggravating. Papa hadn't said a single thing about it, only lectured them on being polite to all of their teachers and listening to their instructions, and All Might's name hadn't passed through his lips once. Why did Cordelia insist on stepping back from foundational heroics? Yumu would have killed to learn under her. She loved Cordelia. Well, I gotta wait for Izuku to clean the classroom. Yumu said brightly and made for the door like a bat out of hell. That definitely could have gone better. Endeavor's kid? The kids were sprawled across the furniture in basically every position known to man. Shoyuta wasn't even sure how Yumu wasn't getting the blood in her head in that position, upside down with her phone right in her face while Izuku brushed out Aki right next to the couch just to make sure all of that hair was going to go somewhere. Why couldn't he brush him in the gen-can or outside? Whatever. Tomorrow was their first official day, and he was incredibly concerned about them actually listening to instructions and their teachers. He wasn't worried about most of the staff. They listened to Hisashi better than him, and loved every last one of his coworkers. What he was worried about was foundational heroics, because they definitely did not love that teacher, and were absolutely going to throw a fit in their own scheming, conniving way. He wasn't looking forward to the fallout, and looking at All Might's lesson plans, there was definitely going to be a fallout. On the plus side, perhaps Botton coming over would help them expel some of that building chaotic energy. While they all loved Aika, Botton definitely held a special place in their hearts for worst possible aunt. In a loving way, of course. Botton was about as out of control as the rest of them. She wasn't allowed to babysit. Hisashi and Mirai were both on patrol, and whatever it was Mirai was doing today, he rarely patrolled nowadays, which left food to Shoyuta. Or lack thereof. Hisashi had frozen food to heat up labeled in the freezer, so maybe Shoyuta would do that, or buy some bentos from the convenience store just for the sake of convenience. He could possibly cook something, but nothing in the fridge was something he could actually make edible. Shuta's phone buzzed with a text and he checked the notification. Botton, picked up pizza, I'm not eating your food. Shoyuta, I was just going to heat some of Hizashi's frozen meals. Botton, consider this, I just really want pizza. Shoyuta stared at the text for a long moment before quietly sighing and giving in to her demands. There was no arguing with Botton. Shoyuta, what time is your patrol? Botton, as an independent underground hero, you should know the answer to that shameful question. Shoyuta, whenever I want. Yes, I know, but what time are you leaving? Botton, 10ish. Maybe 11 if I'm feeling frisky. Shoyuta, so Botton, I can revoke the blessing of your marriage anytime I choose. Shoyuta, I'm sure. Shoyuta, kids have been partial to cheese and honey lately, can you grab one? Botton, all 3 of them? Shoyuta, yes. Botton, I'll get 3. Shoyuta, they do not need a pizza each. Shoyuta, Shoyuta, I have cash to pay you back. Or do you want PayPal? Botton, it's 2 pizzas, Sho, it's fine, these are my brother's kids. Be there soon. Shoyuta, cash it is. Thanks. Botton. Shoyuta, great, see you soon. Shoyuta tossed his phone onto the counter and made for the living room. Izuku, I hope you're prepared to wipe down the couch after brushing him right there, Shoyuta said dryly as he flopped onto the couch. Botton's on her way with pizza. Is she getting cheese and honey? Hitoshi asked, not looking up from his phone. Yes, she's bringing cheese and honey, Shoyuta replied and rubbed at his eyes. He'd better not be having another migraine tonight. Last night had been a nightmare, he almost ran into quirk overuse. It was a good thing he was slated for tonight off. He was basically off every night. Hizashi and Mirai were both working nowadays. It was rare that he could get a day off with both of them, but once summer came around, time together would be easier. Honestly, he needed to cut down patrol hours, but he just couldn't justify it. Bills weren't going to pay themselves. Hizashi and Mirai were of the opinion that they could easily handle the bills and buying sheet for the kids, but Shoyuta just couldn't let it go. He understood he was in the best position to cut down on hero hours so the kids were around someone more. After all, he wasn't the literal brain of Tokyo or a limelight hero, but so few heroes were patrolling the slums of Mustafa nowadays. There had been a resurgence of vigilantes community policing nowadays, and if he cut back, they could start popping up in Mustafa, and he really hated being forced to go after vigilantes in poverty-stricken areas. He got it. He really did. Heroes got paid by both the commission for the amount of their arrests and by the property taxes of the areas their patrol routes they were based in. Most heroes angled for well-to-do areas, even if it brought down their arrests, simply because they were guaranteed that paycheck. Shoyuta honestly hated that he was paid for his arrests. He'd rather go off the property taxes, but the majority of his paycheck was based on the arrests. For the most part, he religiously ignored non-violent crimes, but there were just so many violent encounters in the slums he came across, and he was getting tired. He was only 30 and he knew that wasn't old, but it was also ancient for an underground hero, and his body was starting to feel it in a way that he just hadn't in his younger years. What he wouldn't give to be 22 again. Dad, you're making noises again, Yumu said from the ground, and he opened a lone eye to glare down at her. And? He hadn't even noticed. Whoops. Just pointing it out, she said, and he tilted his head. Her face was looking a little red. Your blood is all in your face. Aren't you lightheaded? No more lightheaded than when you decided to make a first impression by coming in a sleeping bag, she shot back, and Shoyuta remembered that yes, Izuku needed a talking to. Speaking of class, he narrowed his eyes on Izuku. What the hell was that? A 98% success rate, Izuku replied with a shrug. I cleaned the classroom, didn't I? Yes, that was your punishment from me as a teacher, but what on earth possessed you to throw a ball at a random kid? Were there no other options? Shoyuta challenged, and Izuku hummed. You knew DMN well that even without using your quirk you would not be on the bottom. Those 2 girls were not half as trained as you. You get Papa to recommend me and then you get mad that I have to perform on the level of a recommended student, Izuku complained. Assaulting a classmate is not performing on the level of a recommended student. Is it even assault if I knew it wasn't going to hit him? Izuku challenged, and Shoyuta stared at him in disbelief. Yes. Are you really going to act like he didn't deserve it? Yumu asked petulantly. It doesn't matter if he deserved it, it matters if Izuku is acting right. Don't you encourage him, Shoyuta shot back. I will not throw ball at any more of my classmates. You aren't even remotely sorry. Of course I'm not. It was Katsuki. I had to let him know right away that he's not going to be shoving me around, Izuku replied with a shrug, and Shoyuta paused at that. So, is that what was going on with the kid calling you a Deku? It's a childhood nickname, Izuku replied quietly as Shoyuta tried to understand why anyone got away with calling his kid FNG useless. That did not sound like something Inko would allow. Or did she not know? How much did Izuku hide from her? But that wasn't the problem. The problem was Izuku throwing a ball directly at the face of a kid he had not seen in 6 or more years. So you felt like you had to take preemptive measures to make sure a kid that you have presumably not seen for 6 or more years wouldn't bother you, he stated flatly. And this was in no way about revenge. If it was about revenge, I would have made sure it hit him, Izuku replied with a shrug. It was a warning shot. That's all. Did you consider that you could actually just talk to him? Shoyuta asked dryly, and Izuku scoffed. If he was going to still call me that right after seeing me, no, I did not even consider that. What would the point be? That was a point, but Izuku could have at least tried. Gods, Shoyuta hated trying to talk things out with his kids to make sure they understood what they did was wrong. Especially Izuku, because by the time Shoyuta got to the point, he had already examined every angle. It was like trying to raise a 100-year-old man. Izuku just knew everything and allowed for everything, and made every decision firmly without apologies. Okay, just to clarify, you understand what you did was wrong, even if it had good reasons, right? Shoyuta asked, and Izuku wrinkled his nose. If it had good reasons, it wasn't wrong. That's not how that works. Sure it does. Shoyuta was going to bang his head into a wall with this DMN kid. I'm going to remind you that you may be able to see the short-term consequences of your actions, but you can't actually see the long-term results. Yes, but I'm pretty sure I'm practiced enough that I can make a reasonably educated guess. Izuku shot back, and Shoyuta rubbed his eyes. Then I hope you understand the consequence that's about to bite you in the butt. Grounded? Yep. FING grounded. You can have your phone back tomorrow. Hand it over. Shoyuta was going to forever regret instilling the concepts of patience and apathy in his kids from a young age, because Izuku barely seemed to give a shit as he handed over the cell phone. There were literally no reasonable ways to punish these kids nowadays. Absolutely nothing got under their skin. Gods, why were his kids so mature? He could not do anything with them. They understood something was bad, they did it, and they just surrendered to the consequences and accepted them before they even came. How could 3 kids be so much trouble and so low maintenance at the same time? It was beyond him. There was a knock on the front door, and Hitoshi immediately rose to go get it. Botton was here, apparently. Botton was one of Shuta's favorite underground heroes to team up with. He loved working with her. She was an ambush predator, just like him, and her quirk was honestly just fun to work with. Eraserhead was already considered terrifying, but Radio Silence and Eraserhead together were considered a high-level threat. Her quirk was unassuming at first. Hizashi had never outright confirmed quirk marriage, but it was clear as day that it had been the case with his parents, and Botton was it backfiring. Hizashi's parents wanted heroes, and Botton had been considered even more of a failure than Hizashi. She had been born with non-functional vocal cords, meaning they were there, they could move and operate the way they should to protect her windpipe, but they could not vibrate the way other cords could. They had thought she couldn't breathe when she came out, panicked, until they figured out her chest was rising and falling just fine, and she was trying, she just couldn't do it. When her quirk came in, everything made sense. She could mute any noise at all. Objectively, she could have actually handled that little Bakugu problem earlier, simply because the concussive blasts from explosions were sound waves. It had been dismissed as a useless quirk, and equal parts hero worship for Hizashi and spite for her parents had challenged her to rise above and beyond and become one of the best DMN underground heroes out there. She had graduated from Himitsu Academy, one of the most prestigious and secretive hero schools in Japan, exclusively focusing their heroics course on training underground pros. While it was not nearly as famous as UA or Shiketsu, In heroic circles, it was considered the same in terms of quality, next to Kyushishu, which exclusively focused on rescue heroes. Radio silence was a nightmare to deal with. Shoyuta had taught her how to use a capture scarf, so people commonly got the two of them mixed up. It was actually funny to see people try desperately to find out on forums which of them had made an arrest without actual access to the paperwork. In a way, she was one of his successors. Granted, he was only 4 years older than her, and Hitoshi or Yumu were probably going to be his official successor, but she was pretty close, and would likely be giving one of the two guidance when it came time for it. There was shuffling in the Genkan and Hitoshi came back out with 4 pizzas in his hands while Botton took off her shoes. "Hey, Bo," Shoyuta called and there was a clap of acknowledgement. "Hi, Auntie Botton," Izuku called. Botton stuck her head out and clapped again to say hi, and Izuku perked up. "I got grounded for throwing a ball at a kid's face today." Botton's brows furrowed at that and she tilted her head at Shoyuta, her red hair, shaved down on the sides and bouncing into frizzy curls in a mohawk falling slightly to the left. "What did he do?" she asked and Shoyuta groaned, rubbing at his eyes as Hitoshi set down the pizza boxes. "Some kid he apparently knew Premier is in my class and called him a FNG Deku right off the bat, so Izuku figured out a way to justify throwing a baseball at his face." "It's a nickname," Izuku said as he flicked up his visor so he could avoid having to communicate with electronics. "Sounds like a F-Ed nickname," Botton replied with a crinkle of her hooked nose. "I used to call him Kaken." "I think embarrassing nicknames were going around a lot back then," Izuku replied and Yumu choked on air. "You called that raging spitball of fury Kaken?" she asked in disbelief, and oh no, Yumu didn't like him at all. Shoyuta really hoped she wasn't going to get paired up against him anytime soon. He was probably primarily short-range right now with the occasional long-range hit. That wouldn't go over well. He wouldn't even know to protect himself. "Yeah. His mom and mine were best friends," Izuku said as his eyes flicked around the room, focusing and unfocusing at random, and Shoyuta was getting a headache just looking at that. Their moms were best friends? As far as he recalled, Bakugo was on paperwork as only being under the custody of one Bakugo Masaru. There was no mom, but it wasn't like he could ask Izuku about confidential information like that. Maybe they divorced? But most moms ended up with custody. There was no mother listed at all on his paperwork, no joint decisions, no 2 phone numbers to call in an emergency, no. Nope, he was not going to stick his nose into that. Though that was incredibly concerning, given that Inko was apparently this woman's best friend at some point. 2 mothers out of the picture, bad blood running like a FING river between the 2 remaining sons. Damn it. Shoyuta was going to have to keep an eye on them. What a headache. At least he was apparently in therapy. All incoming heroic students were required to have a psych eval to list their triggers and phobias if they had any, just so teachers could avoid those like the plague in lessons and let trained professionals handle them, and Bakuga's notes had been sent from a therapist he had evidently been seeing for 3 years now. They had been a little concerning to say the least, and bare minimum notes revealed that he was regularly engaged in cognitive behavioral therapy. There were a lot of aggression triggers listed, and some PTSD triggers with a note that further therapy was needed for that, and when Shoyuta refreshed himself on the paperwork after class, he had come to the conclusion that the kid had a lot of issues, but according to the therapist he improved at impressive rates and had his coping methods somewhat down. Maybe seeing Izuku again had brought back some bad memories? Was that why he had snapped? Or did he just have a bad attitude in general? Now Shoyuta couldn't think about him objectively. He had none of the facts, and it was aggravating. Pushing Izuku about it was a no-go, too. PTSD was fairly commonplace in his students, so at first he hadn't been too concerned about that. They lived in a very violent world, and on average, 65% of children had their first up-and-close villain encounter by the age of 13 where they were directly in danger, and not simply a bystander. PTSD was just a fact of their society, but now he had to completely rethink everything. Of course, the kid had to be the child of Inko's best friend. Nothing was ever easy for Shoyuta, was it? "Hey, Izuku," he said on impulse. "When you say best friend, how best friend are we talking?" She slapped Papa in the middle of a police station because Mom made him my godfather a week before she died when Mitsuki was supposed to take me in case Mom died, Izuku replied, and Shoyuta hated that he still hesitated over the name, and now he really hated just how insanely complicated that made things. They were best friends like legal paperwork best friends. This was a FING mess. So, this kid is like a cousin almost? Shoyuta asked carefully, and Izuku shrugged. I guess. He called Mom Auntie, and I called Mitsuki Auntie just because he did it. You say that like you didn't like Mitsuki. Of course I didn't, Izuku said, and there was a little derision there. Oh no. She was always yelling and telling Katsuki to act more like me and stuff. He wouldn't have hated me nearly as much if she stopped comparing us the way she did. Just made everything harder on everyone. Yeah, Shoyuta was moving this to the top of his list of things to deal with immediately. An explosive quirk like that with how much training Izuku had coupled with apparent bad blood and 6 years of ending on bad terms, he had to assume the last time he even interacted with this family was when the kid's mom assaulted his papa in the middle of a police station on the day his mother died. Yeah, no, this was not something he could just let lay around. He'd have it dealt with in a week, and tell All Might under no uncertain terms were Bakugo and Izuku to be put together in any capacity tomorrow. Botton tapped his shoulder and Shoyuta looked up. Are you going to keep talking work, or are you going to eat pizza? She asked, a smirk hovering around her lips, and Shoyuta sighed. Thank you for pizza, he said and pulled his wallet out of his pocket, but Botton was already dancing back. No. Botton, let me pay you back, Shoyuta said severely as Hitoshi and Yumu piled their slices on their plates. Izuku, come get food. Hitoshi called and Izuku hauled himself to his feet and drifted over to the kitchen. Hey Dad, Izuku said over his shoulder as Shoyuta tried to corner the elusive Botton. Kinda busy, Izuku what? We can work it out ourselves, Izuku said dryly. Don't worry about it. We're grown. Definitely not grown enough, if you think chucking a ball at him is going to get him to respect you, Shoyuta answered severely. I was just speaking his language, Izuku replied airily as Shoyuta got the yen out and tried to shove it in Botton's hand, who skillfully evaded him and put the island between the two of them. Izuku, telling him you're willing to get violent with him is just going to encourage him to get violent, Shoyuta said in exasperation. Botton, would you take the DM in money? No, she replied, and goddamn it, he'd just have to slip it into her backpack when she wasn't looking. She did this almost every time. Why did she revel in feeding the monsters so much, anyways? At least Aika diversified. Wasn't telling him I was willing to get violent, Izuku said with a shrug as he laid a slice of pizza on his plate. Izuku, that's the shiresu pizza, not the cheese and honey, Yumu said patiently, and Izuku recoiled, wrinkling his nose. Oh. Cheese and honey is to your left. Should have gotten that. I told you to rely on your nose when your quirk's running, Shoyuta said. No, Kazan told me that, Izuku snipped. And as I was saying, I wasn't telling him I was willing to get violent. I told him I was willing to end a fight before it started. There's a difference. You don't speak Katsuki, Dad. I do. You haven't seen him in 6 years, Izuku, Shoyuta pointed out as he slipped his wallet into his pocket, and Izuku quirked a brow. Maybe here, Izuku replied airily. He's present in like almost all of my universes, and heavily present in well over half. Enough to make an educated guess. People are always the same at their core. Katsuki's no exception. He respects that kind of gesture once he's calmed down. It isn't really his fault he's angry all the time, anyways. Nitroglycerin really lowers the heart rate, he's running on pure adrenaline just to stay alive. Are you seriously making excuses for him? Yumu asked flatly. Absolutely not, he's 100% AD-, Izuku replied cheerfully. He's just stuck in fight or flight like all the time, so I can give him a little leeway. As a treat. Botton tapped Izuku's shoulder and he turned to lean against the counter, plate in hand, and looked down at her. Sorry, did you just say the kid that has beef with my nephew has a nitroglycerin problem? She asked, and Izuku took a bite of pizza, watching her hands move with glazed eyes. It took him a second to respond as the ring around his eyes flickered, piecing together where his eyes focused properly to understand the long sentence she had just signed at him. If I couldn't handle a few explosions attached to a trigger-happy hand, I think Kazan would rage quit, Izuku said dryly and took another bite. Don't worry about me. You two are still getting separated, Shoyuta said flatly, and Izuku shrugged. That's fine. Yumu can kick his butt for me, if you're going to be boring and deny us the time-honored shounen tradition of fighting our feelings out and pretending therapists don't exist, he replied cheekily. Why Yumu and not me? Hitoshi complained and Izuku flashed a grin just slightly at the wrong angle. Yumu has the addition of the humbling experience, he replied. How about no one plans on kicking another student but in front of their teacher? Shoyuta asked in exasperation. See, Botton? Izuku commented and took another bite of pizza. Boring. As a pro, I'm going to caution you against specifically planning to kick someone's but because you dislike them, Botton signed and paused to wait for Izuku's purple ring to stop flickering. As the cool aunt that's not a boring preschool teacher, I'm going to say get his butt. This is why you aren't allowed to babysit, Shoyuta said flatly. You let Nizu babysit. Nizu lets himself babysit. We can tell no. You didn't even put your foot down with him about the tutoring. We mentioned them going online and I have actually never seen him make tea that passively-aggressively before, so it got scrapped. It's when he gets passive-aggressive that you have to worry. Gods help the poor fool that thought they could separate Nizu from his gremlin army. As far as Nizu was concerned, he was the proud grandpa to the worst children on the planet who could do no wrong. Hitoshi had once convinced Izuku and Yumu to climb into the vents and use their glowing eyes to freak out the first years, and Nizu had looked right at them and denied them ever being in there. Shoyuta still remembered the first time he figured out Yumu's eyes glowed blood red in the dark. It had definitely been a system shock, that was for sure. Opening her bedroom door and just seeing two glowing red orbs stare at him from a plethora of stuffed animals that suddenly looked incredibly demonic had made him pity his own targets he snuck up on in the middle of the graveyard shift. There was no real reason for her to glow in the dark, either. She just did. Then again, there was no reason for his hair to defy gravity only when he activated his quirk, so he guessed he could allow that. Sometimes unassuming quirks just had to add in that sprinkle of aesthetic to look more intimidating. Honestly, while Shoyuta and Hizashi couldn't afford to show any favoritism, Nizu absolutely could and would, and Shoyuta was more than a little concerned about the whole thing. Was he hard on the kids? Yes, absolutely. He corrected them in a lot of things, namely learning and growing, but when it came to actually disciplining them, it was a matter of pure enabling. Nizu was a nightmare about the kids. In his eyes, they had never done a bad thing in their life, and Shoyuta had no idea if this was how grandparents actually acted or not. His only frame of reference was at Sushi and Chiasso, and they were convinced the boys had crawled up from the depths of hell and Yumu was sent from heaven to tame them. Botton bumped him and offered him a plate, and Shoyuta took it with a sigh before training a severe eye on the kids. Don't stand around the kitchen and eat. Go sit at the table. Did you thank Botton for the food? Thank you for the food. Izuku and Yumu chirped and made a beeline for the table. Shoyuta watched all three sit down and Aki slowly walk under the table to slump down over Izuku's feet before turning his attention on Botton. Have you heard from Kitaro lately? He asked. Shiketsu had really whipped Kitaro into shape, and being the only child at Sushi and Chiasso wanted to see in heroics beyond Aika and Kichi, he had been supported in getting set up as a rescue hero. Shoyuta couldn't help but feel a little bitter about it. Hizashi had paid for over half of Aika's expenses when she went to college. Her parents had covered the tuition and whatnot, and Aika had only needed to get a part-time job at the school library to cover everything else, but it had driven Shoyuta up the wall that Hizashi was still acting like a parent, rising star who had money to throw around or not. Kitaro had graduated from Shiketsu at the top of his class, and Hataru had blown up as an influencer at that point. She was good at it, so she had helped him secure a grant to start his own agency right out of the gates, and paid for the rest of it herself. The whole family just threw money at each other nowadays. Kichi was still traveling around the world, working at different support companies. Hizashi was extremely bothered by it. She was a single 19-year-old girl, only fluent in English and Japanese and JSO, traveling by herself on her support pilgrimage. A job was lined up in Japan in 6 months, but last show Yuta heard, she was in Italy. He's doing well, Botton replied. He actually floated out the idea of sending internship offers to the kids. Apparently Hawks has been driving him nuts, though. Hawks? What's he doing hanging around Hawks? Shoyuta asked in confusion. It's less that he's hanging around Hawks and more that Hawks keeps stealing his rescues and he's fed up. How often are he and Hawks even crossing paths that something like that keeps happening? Sending internship offers to the kids? That would go over well. I think Hawks is trolling, Botton answered honestly. He should have started as a sidekick, Shoyuta muttered. Jumping right into running his agency was asking a lot of himself. Underground Pros went independent right away, but being someone in the limelight was entirely different. Shiketsu had business classes for heroic students, so they at least understood the basics of running an agency, but even so. They're saying he's going to break top 50 at the next rankings, Botton said. He's been photographed with Hawks. There's rumors. The famous family helps. He probably hates that, Shoyuta said dryly and took a bite of his pizza. Yeah, he said. The gossip columns on why he never works with Hizashi are annoying. Why on earth would he even team up with Hizashi? Their quirks are entirely incompatible. And they still had underlying tension. Just because they settled their differences didn't mean they should work together. Honestly, gossip columns were a menace to hero society. They're also wondering if he and Hawks have some energy beyond working well together, Botton added, and amusement was seeping into her eyes. Shoyuta crinkled up his nose. How many fits has he thrown? At least one a week. Hawks is apparently the most annoying man he has ever had the displeasure of knowing, Botton replied. This was exactly why Shoyuta went underground, off the rankings and off the charts. The very idea of dealing with gossip columns was horrifying to him. Poor Kitaro. Shoyuta almost felt bad for him. Hawks was 23 and apparently one of the worst heroes to work with. He moved too fast, didn't wait around for anyone. The fact that he was deliberately stealing Kitaro's rescues to F with him was concerning, to say the least. Was he flirting with him? This really was not the way to do it. As the older brother-in-law, maybe Shoyuta should have some words with him, if Hizashi didn't first. He could just ask Kitaro on a date so Kitaro could shut him down and be done with it. Hey, you just yelled at us to eat at the table. Izuku piped up and Shoyuta sent him a sidelong glare. I'm the adult. Eat your cheese. But I have a question. Ask it. Is All Might going to be teaching us tomorrow? There was something in Izuku's tone that Shoyuta did not trust and did not like. Yes. And you will listen to him and respect him. Fat chance of that happening. Okay. That was not an okay Shoyuta liked. Then again, if he had to be the adult and behave himself around his husband's ex who he dated but didn't for 10 years, surely he could live a little through the kids. Botton turned so her back was to the kids and leaned against the counter and looked Shoyuta right in the eyes. This is going to be ugly. Shoyuta nodded and squinted at the kids. Yumu and Hitoshi were exchanging those glances that they did, and dear gods, how long until the three of them pushed All Might into a meltdown. Restraining himself around All Might in staff meetings had certainly been one hell of an exercise. Shoyuta wanted to nitpick everything he said, take him apart, but the more time he spent around him, with the state All Might was in, the more he slowly realized that at his core, All Might was a pushover. That was it. That was why their relationship had failed so horribly. The Hero Commission pushed him, society pushed him, and All Might let them drive him forward until his body was broken and missing vital organs, and then he kept going. It wasn't even entirely out of moral purity. It was because he finally understood, after whatever fight it was that had done that to him, that he had never come to understand how to say no, and now it was too late to try. He was just going to go until he dropped dead. And Mirai had seen him drop dead. Looking at him now, seeing the state he was in that Mirai had never breathed a word of, Shoyuta realized that was the truth. Mirai had seen him die because he could not stop being a hero, and All Might had decided being a hero was more important than loving Mirai, and that was why Mirai walked away. It was hard to reconcile that. He loved Mirai so much. If Hizashi was the sun, and Shoyuta was the moon, Mirai was their stars sprinkled across the sky. Shoyuta couldn't imagine looking at that man as he woke up in the morning, hair in a rat's nest, eyes heavy with sleep, voice slurred and deep and rough, creases on his cheek from the pillowcase, and just decide he was going to march towards his death and leave him behind. He couldn't quantify hurting someone as precious as Mirai like that. But All Might had a duty, and no one else could fit in that duty. Mirai was theirs now, and realistically, Shoyuta shouldn't be bitter, but it didn't help that he didn't agree with the idea of a pillar of society to begin with. All Might could and would die, and what would Japan have left? Endeavor? As a hero, he understood that many times, heroes caved to the pressure mounting on them. Society was very much founded on the idea that in order to be a hero, you could no longer be a human, which was also why Shoyuta chose underground heroics. To be an underground hero was to inherently be human. You dealt with all of the aspects of humanity that always remained real, and you had to remain human to sustain yourself. Underground heroics were dangerous. It had a high death toll, high injury rate, and for those that survived, every year they spent continuing was a step closer to eventual disability, like Kazan and her limp. But it was inherently human, about the humans that heroics forgot. On the few occasions Shoyuta actually worked during the days, a lot of those patrols were spent running to get groceries for the older members of the community with no one else to help them. It was about being closed intertwined with your community and supporting them. All Might had given up being human to be a hero, and in the process had deeply harmed Mirai. So Shoyuta still was a little bitter. Even if All Might had no idea who their third was. Even if All Might had no idea the mess they had cleaned up that he had made. If the kids acted up tomorrow, so be it. If All Might came to him for advice, well, every teacher needed to learn how to control their class on their own. All Might was supposed to start working at UA last year, but for some reason Nizu had pressured him to wait. Far be it from Shoyuta to go against Nizu's wishes. Even if he did it literally every time. All Might was going to the wolves, and Shoyuta was going to have the time of his life. I am coming through the door like a normal person. All Might announced, and Izuku sank down in his seat just a little more. Yeah, today wasn't going to be great. He was going to have to deal with this all year? He was going to make this man quit. The classroom exploded into chatter at the sight of All Might, and Izuku took a few deep, calming breaths. Objectively, he knew he couldn't reach to punch All Might in the face, but if Hitoshi let him climb on his shoulders. Bad Izuku. No punching All Might in the face. Even if his presence had severely inconvenienced everyone's morning. Izuku just felt lucky that they had gotten there before the media circus. It took a minute for the classroom to settle, and Izuku tuned out the spiel about foundational heroics and this and that, and the class was moving to get their costumes. Izuku stood up, Aki nudging him in the direction of the crowd, and paused. Dad was complaining about how difficult it was to get the suit storage in the classroom accessible. This was a problem. Should he wait for everyone to get theirs and grab what was left? Or was Hitoshi going to get it? Here, nerd, Katsuki said gruffly from in front of him and shoved something into his arms. There's your suit. Thanks. Katsuki was weird. Izuku had no idea what to do with him. Was all Katsuki said, and the scent of nitroglycerin drifted away. Zuku, Hitoshi said next to him, and Izuku tilted his head. Yeah. Is he always like that? Yesterday he was about to kill you. Honestly, I have no idea, Izuku answered honestly. Was Katsuki just trying to behave or something? Did he now understand that consequences were a thing that existed? I'll get your suit next time, Hitoshi muttered. Let's go. Hey guys. Kirishima. The kid was pretty nice. In other universes, Izuku liked Kirishima quite a lot. He was really nice, really calm, just an all-around great, supportive kind of guy. He could be friends with anyone at any time. Great kind of person to have around. Hey, Kirishima, Izuku said as the class moved down the hallway. Yumu was somewhere ahead of them. It sounded like she was talking to Yaoyorozu and Uraraka. So, Sasaki, Kirishima said awkwardly. I was wondering. Ashido told me your dad's Sir Night Eye, and I was wondering if you had, like, a quirk that lets you see the future? Yes and no? My quirk is a little weird. It's easier to explain after you see it in action, Izuku replied. That was not true, not at all, but he would much rather show how much of a badass he was before he explained how difficult his quirk was to work with. It was the little things, you know. Can't wait to see it. Kirishima exclaimed. I thought your quirk was super cool, Aizawa. Mine is kind of boring. I thought your quirk was neat, Hitoshi replied and bumped shoulders with Izuku to show that he was shrugging. It's a good offense and defense. Most people aren't lucky enough to get an all-rounder quirk like that. You think so? Kirishima asked in shock. I mean, when you have a quirk like mine, you think everyone's quirk is cool, Hitoshi replied, somewhere between dry and incredulous. Huh. Oh, this poor, sweet, innocent child. He didn't even think about how dangerous Hitoshi's quirk was. Izuku wasn't sure he should be offended or think it was cute. How did someone have that low capacity for prejudice? You know what, never mind, Hitoshi said, and there was a little amusement swimming around in there. That could have gone bad. Anyways, your quirk isn't like flashy, but you looked med cool when it's on. I thought it was neat. Oh, thanks dude. Do you work out? Yeah, with Izuku and Yumu. We should hit the gym sometime. Have you tried parkour? Izuku asked suddenly, and there was a shift next to him, as if Kirishima forgot he was there. He had a crush. Oh no. Hitoshi's great at parkour. I bet he could show you some things, Izuku said. Really useful for heroics. Hitoshi bumped into him and Izuku could feel that warning glare. Sue him. Izuku's better at it than I am, Hitoshi added. Aki nudged Izuku to the left and the group of boys entered the locker room. Yes, it was time. Izuku clicked open his case and set it on the bench. Swiftly undressing, he folded up his uniform and pulled on his jumpsuit, zipping it up and experimentally swinging his arms around. Hey, Hitoshi, did they get the colors right? He asked and felt around for the utility belt to clip around his hips. Looks like it, Hitoshi replied. Oh, you actually got the vest for Aki. I thought they wouldn't. Of course they were going to give me the vest, Izuku snorted as he flicked up the hood and picked up the HRs. The X straps went in the front, there. Izuku pulled the HRs over his shoulders and clicked the X's together before clicking the two straps on the bottom together and following up with the one on top. Perfectly measured. He just had to tighten a little and Oh, you guys went for a different look, someone said and Izuku tilted his head. What, did you all go with the skin-tight clothes? He asked in amusement. That'll get uncomfortable fast, dude. Chafing. Well, I mean, Kaminari just looks like a regular person. Kirishima and Bakugo don't even have shirts. What's it to you? Katsuki growled. Nothing. You don't have a shirt. I told them to do whatever for it, Katsuki muttered. Not my fault they just decided to do nothing. You should always be specific with support companies, Izuku said dryly before he stopped himself. Katsuki, surprisingly, did not respond. Oh, you have a scarf like sensei. Someone exclaimed as Izuku stepped into the boots and zipped them up. Batons over his shoulders, secure in the H's, and he was ready. Now Aki needed to be ready. Yeah. Been training on one for a few months now, Hitoshi replied as Izuku knelt. Aki, up, he ordered and Aki climbed to his feet. Izuku undid the Velcro straps and slid off his civilian vest. Practiced hands dressed him in the bulkier heroics vest, and he gave him a kiss to the top of his head. Thanks, buddy. A gentle, highly illegal lick was landed on Izuku's cheek, and he grinned. Dad hated it when Aki snuck in with the covert face licks, primarily because he taught Fuku and Sora and their sandpaper tongues that face licks were acceptable. Isn't it weird that we're supposed to wear boots inside? Someone asked. Little bit, someone agreed, and Izuku really needed to get used to whose voice belonged to who. Hearing them all for the first time was a bit of a system shock. Oh, Koji, they didn't get your boots right, Hitoshi said, disappointment dripping in his tone, and there was tapping on his screen. It's okay. Izuku, you got a new visor, Hitoshi said and Izuku's brows furrowed. I didn't ask for a new visor. His hands felt along the bottom of the case and landed on a smooth, plastic piece with an elastic band. There was a braille note. Dismay. I bullied them into letting me give you a hero visor that matches your costume. Don't break my baby. No fancy attachments, but this one has a lock you twist next to the left temple so it can't fall down or get pushed down in a fight. It's more streamlined than your civilian visor and a little more hardy, but try to not get hit in the face. I'm still working on making the 2.0 version that's metal. Good luck. Kick All Might's butt. Izuku was not going to be kicking All Might's butt, but he was definitely going to be destroying his self-esteem if Hitoshi didn't do it first. And Hitoshi would probably do it first. Well, part of being a hero is the look, and you all definitely look the part. All Might announced. Hitoshi was leaning on the wall in the back, Yumu sandwiched between him and Izuku, Koji to his left, and All Might's very voice was grating on his nerves. There was a glance given to the three of them, and Hitoshi raised his eyebrows. Dad hadn't seen their costumes yet, but he was definitely going to be embarrassed when he did. All three of them were in loose jumpsuits, though Yumu's was a little tighter on top and sleeveless. Izuku's had short sleeves and a hood, in green, yellow, and cream. Hitoshi had gone with black and yellow, a carbon copy of Dad's costume, just with the sleeves bunched up on top of his yellow elbow pads and his pants gathered around his yellow knee pads. Yumu had gone with a light gray jumpsuit with amazingly baggy pants and a tight sleeveless turtle tank for the top, all in this thick, soft material, with a massive white zipper from neck to crotch. Mei had evidently slipped her a present too, because she had a headset with floppy white ears like Cinnamoroll. They couldn't outright reference their parents, but they were definitely going to do their hardest. What are we doing today, All Might? Uraraka asked. Is it going to be hard? Will we be expelled if we fail? Hitoshi was pretty sure All Might couldn't expel a gnat, and the questions just amped up, pouring in with the class's collective excitement. Now, settle down. All Might ordered. We're doing battle exercises. 2 on 2, lots will be drawn to determine heroes and villains. Your objective as heroes is to find the bomb and capture it or wrap your opponents in this capture tape, or touch the bomb within 10 minutes. Villains, your job is to evade and protect the bombs until the 10 minutes are up, or capture your opponents. Hitoshi slowly tilted his head and then raised his hand as chatter broke out. All Might, looking visibly relieved at someone actually raising their hand, pointed at him. Hitoshi was definitely going to wipe that look off his face. Yes, young. All Might glanced down at his clipboard and then paled. Aizawa. Most of us haven't received martial arts training, Hitoshi drawled. Are you going over safety procedures? Are we checking our costumes to make sure there's no weighting malfunctions? We haven't received any training. What if a student doesn't know that you shouldn't hit someone somewhere? You can kill someone with one hit, and most of the time that happens on accident. Kazan had gone over where to never hit someone on the head excessively. The nose was an okay place to aim, so long as you weren't aiming up, because the cartilage could be driven into the brain. Never hit around the scalp, never aim for the forehead, the only safe places were the eyebrows and down, and never past the ears. Hitoshi and his siblings had been drilled on one-punch, one-kill deaths. Never aim for the throat beyond light pressure. You could crush a windpipe. If you wanted to wind someone, you went for the solar plexus. Never hold a headlock for a second more than your target going limp. These were important things to know, and he wanted to just throw them in there and tell them to fight? Was he crazy? All Might was staring at him, a little lost, and Hitoshi didn't take pity on him. It was his first day, sure, whatever, but they didn't even know how to fall right. No hits to the head beyond a punch to the nose or eye and nothing in the direction of the throat, or you will be immediately disqualified, All Might said, and he sounded nervous now, and Hitoshi shot a sidelong glance at Bakugu and those massive bracers with actual pins in them, like that wasn't concerning at all. The goal is restraining and limiting a fight as much as you can, as in the case of all heroics. Long, drawn-out fights are never the way to go. This is about being as fast as you can, so keep that in mind. What about checking our costumes to make sure they won't malfunction? Yumu piped in. Some of us have support equipment. What if there's a faulty seam on one of the girls' costumes and they rip and we have an accident on camera? Yeah, some of us have super destructive quirks, Izuku called. Are you going over what to do in case someone takes out a ceiling or a load-bearing wall? Hitoshi very deliberately did not look at Bakugo, but he could smell the tension from across the room. All Might looked a little panicked, a little out of his depth, and Hitoshi narrowed his eyes on him. Some of us have never used our quirks against other people. Is this the best exercise to get used to it? He asked casually. They had gone over break falls for weeks with Kazan before they even moved up to her throwing punches at them. This just did not seem well thought out at all. All Might was squirming a little, but that smile was not dropping. Hitoshi could smell the blood in the water. Just before he went in for the kill, though, Uraraka ruined it. Isn't teaming us up randomly a little inefficient? Uraraka asked, and then Tenya spoke up. Lots of pros don't have a choice in who they work with. It's realistic. You can't just pick a quirk to work with. Tenya announced, and there went his arms. As hard as he was to get along with, Hitoshi couldn't help but like him. Even if he was backing All Might up. Traitor. All Might looked relieved at the chance to not answer their questions, and he jumped on the new question he could actually answer. That is correct, young Ida. Oh, he didn't need to check the class list for Tenya. Now, let's draw lots. All Might pulled out some cans and the three siblings moved forward, plunging their hands into the cans and pulling out their numbers. Hitoshi got it. Who was his? Gee. He asked and looked around. Oh, that's me. Kirishima called and Hitoshi studied him. What? He got lucky. Kirishima's quirk was versatile and foolproof. Izuku called. That's me. The invisible girl said. D. Yumu said and Uraraka stuck her hand up. With me. The teams shuffled together vaguely and All Might corralled them into alphabetical order for whatever reason and Hitoshi eyed Kirishima. What? He could do something with him, definitely. Kirishima had brute force, and Hitoshi had agility. This would go pretty well, he was pretty sure. Right, the first teams are B and G. All Might called after a moment of digging into the can. Oh wow, we get to go first. Kirishima declared and Hitoshi glanced down the line at B. Oh great. They were up against the electric kid and the one with an actual sentient shadow. Of course she couldn't be easy. B are the heroes and G are the villains. All Might announced and Hitoshi resisted the urge to wince. First day of class, huh? He honestly should have expected this. Team G will be given 5 minutes to hide the bomb, and B will have 5 minutes to plan. Good luck. Team G, once you enter the building, your time will start. The bomb must stay inside the building. Let's get down there, bro. Kirishima exclaimed and Hitoshi bit back a sigh as he eyed his opponents. Neither had martial arts training from the looks of it, not with quirks like that. People with powerful quirks never thought they had to train, but they were both long-range. Then again, Hitoshi was technically long-range. They just needed to hear him. But Tokoyami seemed like the strong, silent type, so this was going to be a problem. Kaminari could, hey, wasn't Hitoshi's teammate a literal rock? How much metal made up his chemical makeup? Could he take a hit? Would it hurt him, or if he wasn't naturally insulated, would it actually hurt him or would he be able to conduct the electricity? Hitoshi and Kirishima went out the door and down the stairs together as Hitoshi mulled over these questions. Do you insulate against electricity or conduct it? He finally asked and Kirishima blinked. I haven't really tested it. Well, do you know how much metal is in your rock, or is it just vaguely rock? It's just vaguely rock. It's not really close to any known rock except like gypsum. Kirishima replied awkwardly and Hitoshi worked his lips around thoughtfully before pulling out his phone and Googling gypsum. You know gypsum is the second hardest rock out there, right? He asked in amusement. Yeah, Kirishima replied with a shrug. But I mean, it's not actually gypsum, just pretty close to it on a molecular level. Uncle's a geologist and got curious. It's used as an insulator and has low conductivity. That was actually helpful. But how close was Kirishima to gypsum? Hitoshi wasn't just going to use the kid as a human shield if he didn't know for sure. All right, we aren't testing that right now. Hitoshi decided. Kaminari seems chatty with low impulse control, so he's going to be our first mark. Tokoyami is probably not that talkative, but I think I can get him, and you can probably take a few hits from Dark Shadow, I think his name was. Though if he's sentient, could brainwashing work on a sentient creature? He could at least try. But if he was attached to Tokoyami, would that do something bad? Hitoshi's quirk had never actually hurt anyone, but could it in this case? Yeah, he'd aim for Tokoyami. He could hold up to 5 people, 6 people if he was pushing it now, so 2 people was going to be a breeze. If he could actually get Tokoyami, that is. But if he didn't get Dark Shadow with him, could Dark Shadow break him out? Hand-to-hand combat it was. He probably didn't have a whole lot of experience, and Hitoshi had some range with the capture scarf anyways. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Fumikage was not a man of many words. That was a fact. His partner, on the other hand, had quite a lot of words, and seemingly not enough time to say them, because he was talking a mile a minute about the girls and boys in their class and how it was grossly unfair they had to go up against some of the hottest boys in class. There was absolutely no planning going on here. Kaminari was just talking. I mean, they're ripped, they're tall, how am I supposed to keep my head on straight like this? Kaminari complained and Fumikage stared at him in silence. Your mind goes to dark places. You gotta help me out. I mean, you're pretty distracting too, but Kirishima has those teeth. How can you not be distracted by those teeth? And Aizawa has those biceps. He looks like he could throw me across the room. I'm going to panic. I'm actually panicking. At this point, Fumikage wasn't sure if this boy was having a sexuality crisis or was legitimately feeling intimidated by their opponent's size. Then just let me handle it, he said flatly. They're not throwing Dark Shadow anywhere. How did opponent attractiveness even factor into all of this? The whole class was attractive, Fumikage supposed, but that meant very little. They were opponents. They had to find the bomb. They had to subdue them. He wasn't sure why anything else mattered, but Kaminari seemed like a high-strung guy in general. Hey, what do you think about our class? Kaminari asked. Any of them you think are cute? They're all moderately attractive. You gotta give me stuff to work with, dude. We're about to run a training exercise. We are meant to be planning. Oh, I just thought we were just going to bust in there and knock some heads around and call it a day. I don't think that's a plan. Well, I personally think that for the guys, Todoroki is definitely pretty hot, but Sasaki definitely has the bad boy aesthetic going on. Bakugu's just too pissy, brings down the whole appeal. Guess he's cute in a wet cat way. Not going to speak on the girls because that's objectifying, but Yaoyorozu is definitely pretty. He was clearly a little confused about what objectification entailed, but he had the spirit. Heroes. All Might's voice boomed in their headsets, and Kaminari jumped, sending off little sparks of electricity. Your planning time is up. Please proceed. Plus Ultra. Just follow me, Fumikage muttered and stepped in through the door as Dark Shadow snaked his way out. Hi, Fumi. Dark Shadow chirped. Hello, Dark Shadow, Fumikage said gravely and looked around the room. No bomb here. Is this beach empty? Someone shouted the second Kaminari stepped through the threshold, and before Fumikage had a second to tell him no, Kaminari was responding. Kaminari's face went slack and Fumicage's heart dropped to his shoes. Of course. Of course he had to get the total idiot for his partner. Kaminari, step away from Tokoyami, and walk towards me, Aizawa said mildly as he stepped out from behind a corner. Fumikage moved to stop him, and Aizawa scared. Mind control quirk. You should be careful with those. Never know the nasty side effects. Fumikage stopped, watching Kaminari walk away from him, moving as if he was in a daze, and Aizawa tilted his head as he reached him. Okay, stop, he ordered and undid the capture tape and wrapped it around his arms. There was a pause, and then Kaminari gasped for air. You're out? Sorry. He didn't sound very sorry, but now that the initial combination of exasperation and shock had worn off, Fumikage realized he needed to act, and now. Aizawa was too cool and calm for his tastes, and Fumikage knew that above all, you should fear the cool and calm people. Dark Shadow go. He ordered, and Dark Shadow yipped for a brief moment before darting forward at Aizawa. Aizawa tensed, watching Dark Shadow's snake-like movements, before he launched himself to the right and rolled, coming up fluidly, and he had angled himself to be close to Fumikage. Fumikage stepped back as Dark Shadow turned on a dime and shot for Aizawa, who tensed once again and then launched himself up and to the right, hitting the ground, tucking his chin, and rolling and landing in some kind of Spider-Man crouch, and of course, this was a massive cosmic joke, because not only did Fumikage get the idiot, he also got paired against the kid with obvious training and experience and was down a person while there were still 2 opponents left. Kirishima! Aizawa called, and out of nowhere came the missing second, barreling towards him, completely hardened, and nope, that was an actual wrecking ball speeding towards him. Fumikage did not even want to think about how much weight would be colliding with him if he didn't block him right now. There was that familiar click of Dark Shadow understanding without even having to hear a verbal command, and his attention was directed away from Aizawa, instead leading him on a full collision course with Kirishima, and that's when Aizawa struck. Scarves lashed out, wrapping around Fumikage, and suddenly his arms were pinned against his body. He squawked. He couldn't help it. It was embarrassing, he hadn't done that since he was a child, but he squawked in shock as he was pulled in a dizzying spin right at Aizawa, who slapped a piece of tape on one arm as he spun in, and suddenly Fumikage was pulled to a direct halt, eyes wide in shock, centimeters away from Aizawa's broad chest, who was looking somewhere between amused and smug. His eyes were twinkling. They were actually twinkling, the smug BSRD, and there was a bare hint of a grin hovering along his lips. He smelled good. Goddamn it. Villain team wins. All Might announced in their headsets. You didn't hear that, Fumikage said after a long moment. Sure I didn't. But I'm definitely going to remember it, Aizawa drawled and flicked his scarf, unraveling it and releasing Fumikage before peeling the tape off as Kirishima moved to help Kaminari. Fumikage got a boulder with legs thrown at him and he squawked. He actually squawked. And today was supposed to be a good day. Lovely. Sasaki was tiny. She looked like a doll, standing there and staring up at the building. Ochako wasn't exactly tall, but she definitely had several centimeters on the other girl. She couldn't help but be jealous at her costume. Ochako hadn't been specific enough, so she had ended up in a skin-tight affair with heels, whereas Sasaki looked like she had planned for just about everything. Pale gray sleeveless jumpsuit, with white and blue accents that worked well with that pastel blue hair of hers, blue elbow pads and knee pads, with a headset designed to look like big, soft white ears like Cinnamoroll. It was tighter on the top than on the legs, with white and blue accented fingerless gloves going up above her wrists, and Ochako felt like she had seen it before, right down to the darker gray combat boots, but she just couldn't place it. Unlike the rest of their class, the Sasaki siblings and Aizawa had weapons already. Sasaki had a slim baton clipped to her belt, with a smooth button on its side, a collection of different colored darts, weirdly enough, along the rest of the belt. So, Ochako said, and why was she so nervous? You saw my quirk. What's yours? Sasaki turned her head to look at her with those luminous button eyes before she smiled, soft and sweet, and held up her palm for Ochako to look at. How strange. She had pads on her fingers, like Ochako, but instead of pink, they were the same gray as her costume. Kind of funny the 2 people with a 5-point touch quirk ended up in the same team, huh? Sasaki asked, her voice so sweet, light, airy. If I touch someone with all 5 fingers, I put them in a state of hallucinatory sleep paralysis. It's a passive quirk, so I can't turn it off, so don't grab my hand, okay? It's called Morpheus Trap. Oh. Ochako blurted. She had not expected that out of this girl. Okay. How are we going to use that? Well, we're at a bit of a disadvantage. Tenya and that Bakugu kid, and her face twisted in distaste, are a mid-range fighter and a speed type, which is practically mid-range disguised as close range. You can use your quirk to turn to long range, but that can be worked around by clearing a room of objects. Can you use it on yourself? Yes, but it makes me sick if I do it too long, Ochako answered carefully, and Sasaki hummed, looking up at the building. Bakugu doesn't seem like he is the type to do teamwork. Tenya knows my quirk, so we have to assume Bakugu knows it, but it's unlikely he'll actually listen to him before running off to engage. If I was going to predict what would happen, I think Bakugu is going to run off to face us and leave Tenya to guard the bomb. Do you have any martial arts training? No, Ochako admitted, much to her dismay. Here's the plan, Sasaki said and laid it out. Ochako listened, enraptured by the ease Sasaki displayed in a combat scenario. You have training, she finally said when Sasaki finished explaining. Sasaki flashed her a quick smile. When you have a quirk like mine, you have to work for it. Hero team, your time allotted for planning is up. All Might said in their ear, and the girls straightened up. Ready? Sasaki asked brightly, and Ochako nodded seriously. Let's go. The two girls walked into the building, Sasaki walking with confidence and purpose as Ochako's heels clacked irritatingly on the concrete. How long have you been training? Ochako asked carefully, and Sasaki brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. She had little cinnamoroll stud piercings hiding under the floppy ears. How cute. Almost 3 years, Sasaki answered. Zuku and Toshi have been training for 6. I'm still playing catch-up, honestly. So you're all friends? Ochako asked carefully. Zuku is my brother, and Toshi is too in his own way. Our families are basically just one big family, Sasaki replied and then grinned. They're terrible really. Living with a bunch of men is a nightmare. They're all so overprotective. So, is Sasaki your twin? Ochako asked and Sasaki laughed. No. But we like to let people think that. It's fun to watch them try to figure out how we look so different and have such different quirks. I was pretty confused, Ochako admitted and Sasaki shot her a wink. Don't tell anyone. Ruins the fun. So, you're good at fighting? Ochako asked carefully. You'll just have to find out. Sasaki said brightly and Ochako felt redness grow in her cheeks. There was the sound of explosions down the hall and Sasaki took a step back and snapped out her baton. Ready? She asked and Ochako nodded, determination setting in. She would not embarrass herself. Bakugu burst out from around the corner and Ochako rapidly backed up as Sasaki engaged. Who the F are you? Bakugu roared and Ochako's brows furrowed in confusion. What? Sasaki's baton slapped out, knocking off his aim and sending a blast wildly off target. Where do you get off calling yourself his sister, huh? Bakugu shouted and followed up with a blast Sasaki easily dodged, almost lazily. You're his cousin at best. Auntie Inko didn't have a daughter. This isn't the time to be getting personal, Bakugu, Sasaki quipped and dodged another blast. Uraraka, go. Bakugu was angry and big, and everything Uraraka knew about being a girl was screaming at her to not leave a girl alone with an angry, large boy. And then Sasaki did something wild. Bakugu went in with a right hook, and she slid her foot in between his legs, wrapped her baton around his arm, and twisted hard. Bakugu went flying, and Uraraka shook herself out of the screaming voice in her head reminding her girls had to stick together and told it to shut up. They were training to be heroes. Sasaki could clearly handle herself, not even flinching at the explosions leveled on her. Bakugu rolled to his feet and powered forward once again, and Sasaki lifted up her leg and kicked him directly in the chest, sending him tumbling back. Oh wow, she was. Ochako shook herself. Sasaki said to go, so she had to go, use the explosions from Bakugu to cover her noisy steps. Ochako took off at a run, up the stairs, heels clacking loudly, the explosions growing louder and louder. He's probably on top. Wear your shoes as long as you can to protect your feet, but when you get close, you need to take them off. They're a mess. Your costume needs alterations, badly. Maybe some white boots? If you're going to be a rescue hero, you can't go running around after an earthquake in wedge heels. Ochako came to the 5th floor and slipped off her shoes before peering into room after room. Shoes held lightly in her grasp as her animal print sock-covered feet padded lightly on the floor. Ida's voice drifted down the corridor to her, and she peeked into the room, counting the doors that led her here. He was monologuing. She needed to get out of here before she laughed. Ochako slipped away from the door and rushed for the stairs, activating her earpiece. The building was shaking with explosions at this point, so they were still going at it. I found the bomb. 5th floor, 3rd door down on the right. I'm getting into position, Ochako whispered, and there was a grunt as Sasaki activated her earbud. "Thank you. 1 second, let me wrap this up. Keep your shoes off." The explosions abruptly fell silent, and Ochako slid into the room, set her shoes on the floor, and hauled herself onto the windowsill. She needed to time this right. She couldn't float for very long, so she had to go right when Sasaki activated her earbud for a beep before she entered the room. It was a long drop. A very, very long drop. Ochako hoped Sasaki could heard Ida right. The way she stood firm against that charging boy said she probably could. Ochako stared at the little Tom Nooks all over her socks and flexed her fingers against the frame. It was a really long drop, but if she wanted to build up her quirk better, she would have to be okay with heights. The comm beeped, and there was the immediate sound of Ida's engines activating, followed by a crash. Ochako didn't hesitate. She pressed her fingers to her stomach and floated out the window, holding tight before pushing herself up as nausea churned in her gut. 30 seconds. Sasaki said she needed 30 seconds. There was another crash, like something heavy and metal collided with the floor, and a clang as Sasaki presumably hit Ida with her baton. Ochako got a grasp on the windowsill and peered in, watching with wide eyes as Sasaki lunged for the bomb. Ida grabbed it and ran, and Sasaki switched it up, spinning to kick him in the gut and backing up as she flicked her baton. Suddenly, the smooth baton sprang out, forming a crossbow, and she loaded it with a pink dart. Ida set the bomb down and charged her, and there. Ochako's chance. Ochako pushed herself up and through the window, flying through the air, just as tiny Sasaki stood tall against Ida charging her and let a dart fly through the air. It hit his chest and exploded into a pink gas that had him crashing to the ground just as Ochako touched the bomb. Hero team wins. All Might announced in their headsets, and Ochako pressed her fingers together. "Release," she whispered and fell on the bomb, clinging to it like a koala as Sasaki walked over and stared up at her. "Do you need help down?" she asked, and Ochako squeaked. "Yes, please." Sasaki held out her arms. "Jump." Ochako squeezed her eyes shut tight and just slipped down, slowly, inch by inch, and Yum Emu caught her by the waist to steady her. "Are you okay?" Sasaki asked, and Ochako nodded before her eyes widened, and she darted to the other side of the bomb to cough up her breakfast. "Oh no," Sasaki said, and all of a sudden there were hands holding her hair back as Ochako burned with embarrassment. This was humiliating. "Are you okay?" "It's normal," Ochako rasped as the medbots rolled in. "I have to go release Bakugu," Sasaki said. "Your socks are cute." That statement only served to further embarrass Ochako. Here she was, puking her guts out in front of a cute girl that could kick her but, without her shoes, wearing Tom Nook socks. A warm presence hovered right over her back and lips came dangerously close to her ear. "I'm wearing corgis in strawberry costume socks," Sasaki whispered. "You're so red." Ochako made a noise like a cat that got stepped on, and that was the end of her first real interaction with Sasaki Yum Emu. She was definitely in trouble. "I'll handle it," Shudo said bluntly as his partners stood there awkwardly. "We should make a plan." "I'll handle it," Shudo repeated and slid his foot out. Ice exploded across the building, completely freezing it over, and he passively walked in. "Wait there." He knew next to nothing of his opponents, but that didn't really matter. The invisible girl couldn't possibly get out of his ice, and the other boy hadn't shown a single thing about his quirk in the assessment. He just ran the course, managed fairly well without using a quirk at all, so Shudo could only conclude that his quirk was non-physical. He was clearly trained, if the bulk was anything to go off of, but Shudo was trained too. And non-physical quirks never held up. Not against him, anyways. He did feel bad about freezing the dog though. He'd melt him out first. He liked dogs. Shudo may have seen him at the recommendation exam, but he was doing something else. Didn't they separate the exams by quirk type? He couldn't recall. There was just the obstacle course. It didn't matter. He was frozen stiff at this point, unable to do anything. Shudo walked up the stairs, figuring they'd placed the bomb on one of the top floors. He'd have to sweep through. Eyes casting about, he strode down the silent halls, wondering why they weren't making any noise. Had he frozen their faces? Could they breathe? Moving more quickly now, he made it to the 5th floor with no sign of any of them. Where were they? Shudo turned down a corner and caught sight of the bomb. Entirely unguarded. His eyes cast about, looking for a telltale sign of the body of the invisible one, but there was nothing. No one was here. Something was wrong. He paused in the doorway and took a careful step in. Nothing. No one. Where were they? He froze them. He was sure he froze them. There was no way they could escape him. There was no warning. 1 second Shudo was standing there, about to stride towards the bomb, and the second a heavy body was falling directly on him, slamming him into his ice and making his teeth clack loudly as he smacked his chin. In 2 seconds he was wrapped, a heavy, solid weight on his back, manhandling him like he was a twig before he could even blast him with his ice. "Aki, find the other one," the boy ordered as Shudo stared with wide eyes at the bomb. "What? Non-lethal? Hagakure, follow him. Todoroki is out." All Might's voice crackled in his earbud and the boy rose, leaving Shudo on the ground in something akin to shock. "What? You know," the boy said casually as he walked to the doorway, out of Shudo's line of sight. "All you flashy quirk types are the same. You automatically assume everyone else is helpless. It's pretty insulting, you know that?" Shudo didn't respond. He just kept staring at the bomb, trying to quantify what just happened. Did he fail? "If you took Shoji with you, you might have managed to make it," the boy added, and then his footsteps echoed away. 10 minutes later, Shudo was still in shock, standing in the observation room as he stared at the replay. The boy flicked up his visor, revealing glowing green and purple eyes that stared at nothing as he chatted with the invisible girl. There was no audio, but it was clear he was planning something. And then came Shudo's ice. The boy yelled something, and the 3 of them leapt in sync as it spread under their feet, landing somewhat safely as the girl slipped and fell on her, but while the boy landed and rolled forward when his boots gave out on the slick ice. He put the visor back down, said something to her, and let his dog guide him to the wall, where he felt along the surface of the ice to find purchase to climb up fluidly and get into the pipes lining the ceiling. The girl took off her gloves and shoes and vanished, and the dog loped behind the bomb to wait. And then Shudo came in, hesitating in the doorway, looking for signs of life. The boy just dropped down on him, bringing him to the ground, saying his piece, and then leaving, his hand trailing along the wall as he tilted his head this way and that, listening for something. He then took off in a run, his hand following the wall as he counted, his mouth moving with each step. How had he memorized the amount of steps so fast? The dog was ahead, sniffing along the walls, searching for Shoji, who had entered the building when All Might declared him out. He caught the scent and broke into a run, following Shoji's scent, and didn't hesitate for a second before he launched himself at Shudo's hapless partner, grabbing him by the pants to yank him down and pull as Shoji desperately tried to detangle himself. And then he jerked, as if he'd been punched in the face, and a roll of capture tape was pulled out of the dog's vest, wrapping around Shoji's head, which was apparently close enough for All Might, because that was the point the exercise ended. "All right, who has thoughts?" All Might asked. The ponytail girl raised her hand. Todoroki relied too much on raw strength, and showed no teamwork. Shoji was not assertive in the slightest, showing no idea of what to do with a difficult teammate. When he froze the building, Todoroki assumed he had won, showing little caution in his search, and not utilizing his partner's quirk, which would be perfect in a search scenario such as this one. On the flip side, Hagakure and Sasaki showed exceptional teamwork. I am unsure as to what Sasaki's quirk is, but I assume it has to do with his eyes, and I am guessing he utilized it to complete the exercise. He also successfully used Aki's noise to hide Hagakure's approach. "And who would you call the MVP of this fight?" All Might asked. "Aki," a chorus of voices said, and Shudo pursed his lips. "You can't choose the dog because he's cute," All Might chastised them. "Sasaki easily, if only because he used teamwork to make Hagakure shine," the girl replied and then smiled a little. "But one could argue Aki would make an excellent MVP. His nose was essential in the plan." "Sasaki, what is your quirk?" Sasaki, Shudo now recognized him as, was leaning against the wall with his band of friends, idly scratching Aki's chin. "It's a little complicated," he responded with a rueful grin. "Unless you were asking my sister." Sister? Shudo's eyes landed on the only girl with the 3 boys. Pastel blue hair in a bob, black button eyes, a petite frame. Had she already fought? She didn't look even remotely related to the tall, muscular boy. She was the one that put the explosive one down with her fingertips. Her quirk was a mystery. Honestly, that entire group had shown a high level of skill. It was a little concerning. Shudo should have paid more attention to who was hanging out with who. In the assessment, only the rock-headed one and the purple-haired one showed their quirks. All non-physical. Was it a thing? No, Ponytail said shortly. I was asking you. It's called parallel sight, Sasaki the boy answered with a shrug. And it's complicated. If it's called sight, then you use it to see. Why do you have a guide dog? The pink-skinned girl wondered. You can't just ask someone why they're blind. The brunette with a bob gasped. She had been with the Sasaki girl. Come to think of it, that pairing had been mildly ironic. The only 2 5-point touch quirks in class. Sasaki boy just sighed, long and heavy. I can only see with my quirk, and I can only use it for about 5 hours a day reliably without actually pushing it. Any longer than that, and there are consequences, and that time limit is entirely dependent on what lengths I push it to when it's actually in use, he answered shortly. And I don't even actually see what's in front of me when it's active. Technically. Not technically? It's complicated. That does sound complicated, Ponytail agreed slowly, and the purple-haired one rolled his eyes. When he opens his eyes, he can see through the eyes of another version of him in a parallel universe. He can navigate those parallel universes at will, find the ones that are closest to him, trip the time streams a bit so he's seeing into the future, and use them to determine the best route to what he wants. It's not that complicated, Zuko. You gave a very dumbed-down version, Sasaki protested. And that's all they have to know, the purple-haired one drawled. That quirk did not sound like something that could deal with half-hot, half-cold. But it did. It dealt with it very well, and Shudo had a dawning realization that it must be the result of training. Heavy training. It sounded like a nightmare of a quirk to control, with a lot of drawbacks. The purple-haired boy didn't mention him having a built-in analysis factor, so he did all of that on his own? How fast could he go? He just took Shudo down and... Shudo did not understand that. He was beefy, yes, and tall, but he moved like a pro when he walked, now that he thought about it. Like someone with martial arts training. It was a specific lethal kind of grace Shudo had intimately memorized. You automatically assume everyone else is helpless. It's kind of insulting, you know that? He kind of had, hadn't he? And Sasaki had definitely clocked it. This was awkward. Shudo was just going to have to stay far, far away from that group. That was really embarrassing. Izuku. Itoshi. Oh, hey Yumu. Mirio was flagging them down, and Izuku came to a stop, tilting his head as the newly minted third year came alongside them and clapped a hand on Izuku's shoulder to make sure they knew he was there. Hi, Mirio. Izuku said cheerfully. Hey guys. Mirio said boldly. How was your first day? It was super good. Izuku replied and went in for the incoming side hug. Mirio was a hugger. Nijaya. Look, it's Nizu's gremlins. Mirio called. Oh, hi, Yumu. Nijire said from far off behind them. Hi, Nijire. Yumu shouted, and Izuku ducked on instinct, because Yumu got very exuberant about her waving when Nijire was involved. Izuku couldn't tell if she had a hero crush on her or just a crush. I heard you had a wild foundational heroics today, Nijire said as she came up next to them. Oh, yeah, Yumu said awkwardly, and Izuku frowned. You sound sorry, he accused her. I'm not. You'd better not be. That was literally a perfect 2 for 1. Even if Katsuki had been weirdly helpful in a way he only was when he was apologetic, but that was not enough for Izuku. Katsuki needed to use his words like a grown person. I just thought I freaked you Raraka out a bit, that's all. Yumu blurted. I think she was just embarrassed she threw up in front of you, Yumu, Izuku said dryly. Or are you talking about that moment when you got all close and whispered in her ear? Hitoshi asked and Izuku tilted his head. Yumu did what? Shut up, Hitoshi, Wait, Yumu, what did you do? Don't worry about it. Wow. Mirio said, and oh, they were squabbling in front of senpais now. You're on your first day and already flirting? Kirishima is really interested in Hitoshi, Izuku said slyly. Hitoshi's too busy practicing ballroom dance moves with Tokoyami for that, Yumu added, and Hitoshi turned on her. Before chaos could strike, Izuku put a hand on each of their faces and shoved them apart. Honestly, why was he always the voice of reason with these two? Don't touch my face. Yumu admonished Izuku, and Aki let out a quiet woof to tell them to calm down or he was going to get upset. Hitoshi did what now? Honestly, was he the only one that behaved for the whole thing? He really should have amped it up. Ridiculous. He was definitely not expecting Hitoshi to come out of left field like that, though. Uraraka he could understand from Yumu, of course he could, but Hitoshi was really working hard to keep Izuku off balance, it seemed. I wasn't flirting, I was trying off that new move Dad showed me, Hitoshi grumbled. Yumu, on the other hand, I wasn't flirting. I was just making sure she was okay. Yumu protested. Yumu, you should be proud that you apparently have more game than your brothers, Izuku pointed out. Can you two stop? Yumu whined. Well, you three obviously had an exciting day. Mirio said, and oh, they were doing their siblings-only zone thing again. Psst. The three of us were going to head out right now. Were you heading home too? Oh no, we're going home with Pops, Hitoshi replied. Dad has patrol and Pops gets deeply wounded if we don't wait for him. He really did. Pops was a very sensitive man who was already feeling emptiness syndrome, and they were literally on their first official day of high school. He was really getting excessive about the smothering lately, not that Izuku really minded. Neither did Yumu or Hitoshi. He was Pops after all. Any and all attention from Pops was welcomed. When are you going to the agency again? Izuku asked Mirio before he could leave. I think next week or so your papa has a spot for me. Make sure he actually eats lunch, please. Always do. Mirio chirped. See you three. Tell your Pops I said hi. Bye, oh favored Niza spawn. Nijire called teasingly. Bye, Tamaki whispered, and wow, he was making progress in the whole being terrified by the rowdy siblings thing. It only took a semester. It was kind of nice to have other students around that actually knew about the family situation. Izuku was just happy that it was 30 minutes past the last bell and the big three could talk to them openly about it outside. Should we go wait in the lounge for Pops? Hitoshi asked, and Izuku hummed. There was a pressure at the back of his head, just hovering on the edges of his senses. He wasn't sure what it was, but it was like he was getting a warning. Izuku wasn't sure he should touch it. He had promised Papa he would let life just be life, after all. But it was this nagging sense. Something was off, it was off, and he should check on that. Izuku, Hitoshi said. You with us? Izuku shook the feeling off. It was probably a general Katsuki warning. Oh yeah, let's go wait for Pops. Pushing the thought out of his head, he followed Hitoshi and Yumu back into the building. It was time to cause chaos in the teacher's lounge. One serving of his favorite pastime, coming right up. Just because Nizu encourages it doesn't mean you three should do it, Pops said as Izuku twisted the dial that started the dishwasher. It wasn't that bad, Izuku shot back. It was that bad, don't do it again, Pops replied. Ken actually wanted you three in his class before this. Well, that doesn't really matter, because Dad got us anyways, right? Izuku challenged. I meant he liked you. He no longer likes you. He's just mad, Izuku replied petulantly. He knew how awful we were. It wasn't even that bad. You know the last time we had to use that fire extinguisher? Never. We have never had to use the fire extinguisher before. That was actually an accident. What else did you think would happen? You just got your phone back, Izuku. I just need you to behave for 1 week. Can you do that? Go a full week without an incident. Pops was very aggressively wiping down the table. Hitoshi and Yumu were out back with Aki, leaving Izuku with the brunt of Pops. Frustration. Yes. 1 week, Izuku. No pranks, no acting out in class, No sending my coworkers running for the hills. Pops bopped Izuku on the nose with the paper towel roll. 1 week. Alright, I'll behave for a week. The only reason you're getting off is because the fire wasn't supposed to happen. Got it? Got it. The sliding glass door opened loudly and Pops stuck his head out into the backyard. Hitoshi. Yumu. I'm heading to the show. He called. All right. Hitoshi called and there was a grunt as he presumably threw the ball for Aki again. All right, Pops said as he closed the door again with a click. All right, Papa will be home in an hour. Snacks are on the counter if you can't wait for him to cook dinner. Don't burn down my house. We've already had enough fire-related incidents to last a year. Capiche? Capiche is such an old man term, Izuku complained. Yeah, well, I'm old, deal with it, Pops shot back. You're 30. That's not old. Everyone else's parents are old. Yeah, well, you're definitely giving me gray hairs, so, Pops replied, and a hand was on the back of Izuku's head, pulling him forward so Pops could land a kiss on the top of his curls. Remind me to touch up your dye this weekend, yeah? Your sides are getting long. Haircuts this weekend, got it? Izuku said and leaned in to give Pops a hug. See you after work. See ya, little listener. Pops replied and pulled away. Remember, Dad isn't home until late, so try to be quiet tonight so he can get his rest before class tomorrow. Kay. We'll be quiet. You're going to be late. There was a jingle of Pops grabbing his keys and another kiss was pressed to Izuku's head before he was rushing for the door and pulling on his shoes. See you in a few hours. The front door slammed shut and locked and Izuku popped his head out into the backyard. Pops is gone. Running paws bolted for Izuku and suddenly Aki was nudging around his pockets. Oh, you want a cookie? Izuku asked. Let's get you a cookie. Guys, we gotta do our workouts. There was another press of general discomfort as Izuku led Aki inside and got out his bag of treats, but Izuku pushed it aside. Let life be life. Katsuki was probably going to act out tomorrow, but it would be fine. Izuku could handle it without peeking. Welcome to the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ for short. 13 was standing by the stairs, and despite thoroughly ruining everyone's day yesterday, Yumu was actually really excited to see them. I'm the space hero, 13. Oh my gods, it's 13. Uraraka hissed next to her. They're my favorite hero. Good taste, Yumu murmured. She was partial to Eraserhead, herself, but Uraraka definitely got points for clocking him on the first day. This is my dome, 13 continued. Here we have every disaster scenario you can think of. There's a fire zone, an avalanche, a shipwreck, a squall, an earthquake, basically everything you need to prepare yourself for your life as pros. All Might was going to join us, but he unfortunately was called away on hero business, so it's just going to be me and Eraserhead today. They held up 3 fingers and Dad let out a huff of irritated air next to Yumu. What was that about? Now, before we start, who here knows my quirk? 13 asked, and Uraraka's arm shot up in excitement. Okay, that was cute. Yes, Uraraka? Of course they had already memorized the class list. How could you not love 13? Black hole. Your fingers create a vacuum and everything SCD in gets turned to dust. That's correct. 13 said. As it's perfect for rescue work, I have been working in the field for 18 years now, and it has enabled me to save a great many lives. But this is also a power that can kill. Easily. A quiet, somber silence fell on the class, and Yumu resolutely refused to look down at her hands. All of you have the potential to kill, 13 said flatly. That is the nature of our society and the nature of humanity. Everyone has that potential, regardless of their quirks. Here, you will learn the importance of valuing life above all else, even the lives of villains. Today, we're going to be doing a tour of the grounds and running simulations through each zone. Izuku, just behind her, suddenly shifted and lifted his head. Sensei, he said, and Yumu looked over her shoulder. Izuku had been jumpy all day. What is it, Sasaki? Dad asked, and Izuku looked left, right. There were lines in his forehead. Something's wrong. What do you mean something's wrong? Izuku, Yumu asked softly. What was it about USJ? Izuku muttered and reached for his visor. What's that? Uraraka asked and pointed down to the fountain far, far below. Yumu had grown up in the USJ. It was almost her playground from age 13 on up. After school, sometimes they were set loose to scramble through ruins and swim in the shipwreck zone while the teachers went through their monthly safety inspections. They didn't get to go often, but when they did, she cherished those memories. There were always mysteries to discover here, places to be, things to do. She knew every inch of this place like the back of her hand. Inspections took hours, well into the night, which was the only reason they were allowed to come at all. She knew every tick of this place, every safety procedure, every surprise it held. Never before had she seen this, though. There was a swirling black void right next to the fountain, and that was not a part of her Yuhi. People were coming out of the vortex, and Yumu took a step back as Izuku flicked up his visor. Yumu, go right, he said quietly even as chatter broke out. Is this part of the training? Someone asked as Yumu sidestepped to the right, body tense. No, this was not a part of training. No. These are real villains, Dad said and moved forward. 13, protect the students. Wait, Dad was moving forward. That meant Dad was attacking. Dad was an ambush hunter, he wasn't. D. The protest died in Yumu's throat as the class exploded. Dad was moving forward, she had to stop him. She had seen Dad come home banged up before. Black eyes, broken arms, dislocated shoulders, torn muscles, Dad had been through it all. He was very careful, of course. He didn't get injured nearly as much as his peers. But he still got injured. And it still hurt every time. Yumu had grown up understanding that her parents were heroes. But Dad was moving forward. There were people in USJ and he was moving forward. Dad, no. Hitoshi blurted, stepping forward, and his eyes were panicked, and now the whole class knew Dad was Dad on the third day of school, and he was moving forward. Hitoshi, stay back, Dad ordered, not even reacting to the outburst as the entire class fell into silence as they realized that there were villains down there and someone's dad was heading right towards them. You're an ambush hunter, there's like Fort. Toshi, Dad said shortly. Stay back. He glanced over his shoulder, and Yumu stared in horror as his dark eyes landed on his cluster of kids standing there, like he was memorizing their faces, and no, there were 40 people down there and he was memorizing their faces, no. And then his eyes hardened and he launched himself down the stairs. No! Yumu screamed, but it was too late. He was gone, hair in the air, eyes on fire, his scarves lashing through the air, he was gone, Dad was down there, he was gone. Yumu couldn't stop her feet from moving. She charged forward, heart pounding in her chest, and Hitoshi lashed out to grab her before she could do something she regretted, and then out of nowhere there was a black void in front of her and she couldn't see her dad. No! She screamed again as Hitoshi yanked her back against him, her heart pounding in her chest as her vision went red. Gods, what could she even do? Slap someone? Put them to sleep? Scare them a little? She was 15, she wasn't even 16 yet, it was her third day of high school, what could she actually do? She couldn't do anything, but Dad was down there and she couldn't reach him. Hitoshi was pinning her to his chest and Yumu realized the roaring in her ears was so loud she couldn't hear what the mist was saying. Her world was just pounding waves screaming in her head, overtaking all of her senses and threatening to drown her. She couldn't hear. All she could feel was the pounding of her heart in her chest, and she needed to move. Why was Hitoshi pinning her? Dad was down there and he needed help. Didn't Hitoshi realize Dad was memorizing their faces? Dad was going to die, she had to save him, she needed her dad, they all needed their dad, she needed to get to him, and… Yumu, go right? That was what Izuku had said. He told her to go right. Bakugo and Kirishima were flying through the air, and Yumu breathed an apology to Hitoshi before reaching up and slamming her arms through his grip to break it. And then she charged. Not at the swirling black void. She had no way of knowing what she could touch and what she couldn't. No, she was going to the right. Right towards the edge of the banisters. Because Izuku said go right, and Izuku was always right. There were screams of shock behind her, and she dimly realized no one was following her because they were all getting thrown through portals, and there. Her hands slapped down on the banister and she launched herself over the edge. The air rushed around her and she hit the tree, scraping her way down and catching a branch to hang there. The best thing you could do to catch your breath after a long run was to lift your hands over your head, and suddenly the world was clear. Yumu was taking deep breaths, dangling 6 feet over the ground, and she then realized she had just done something insane. She just threw herself off a ledge that was at least 2 stories high. She needed to calm down. Deep breaths, in and out. Dad was fighting it out just a little ways ahead, but she needed to not be in his way. Dad was an ambush hunter. He had given her so many tips about ambushing people. Yumu was practically built for it, and the number one thing he had always drilled into her head was to be patient and wait for an opportunity to strike. Even when your body was shaking with the jitters, even when you were internally panicking, even when you wanted to jump the gun and charge in, you needed to wait for your window or you would make a mess of things. Yumu took a deep breath and let go of the branch. The air rushed up and she dropped, hitting the ground in a roll to absorb the impact, and came to her feet. Patience. She needed to be patient. The exits were blocked, they were trapped inside, the only hope they had was for someone to get out, but in the meantime, she needed to try this communicator to call for help. Yumu crouched behind the bush and took a deep, steadying breath. So she was in a villain hostage situation. Comply was the number one thing she knew to do, but from the sound of it, these villains were here to kill them, so complying was not an option. Next option was to call for help and get the pros here. Squeezing the end of the plush ear, she activated the radio, only to be greeted by a beeping error noise. No service. She pressed it again, but there was still the error noise. She wasn't in her school uniform. Her costume did not have the distress beacons sewn into the seams like her school uniform. Next step. Peeking over the edge of the bush, she watched the chaos play out. She couldn't see Dad, but villains were still flying, and she could catch the scarf moving. Her eyes followed the line of trees and bushes. She needed to be fast and silent to get closer. It was time to move. There was some skinny, borderline emaciated dude standing there, next to a gigantic hulking mass of black flesh and exposed brain. What was that thing? That couldn't be a person. The eyes were dull. It was just standing there, not moving, barely breathing. There were no signs of life. There was no nervous twitch, no irregular breath pattern, no nothing. It was just standing there. It was a threat. That was a threat, but it had eyes, and it had a brain, and it had skin, a lot of exposed skin, which meant Yumu was a bigger threat. If that thing got unleashed on Dad, there was no stopping it. She could already tell. You're a threat, Yamimu. This is why you wear the gloves. I need you to understand this, the man said. So when I tell you to keep those gloves on, I mean those gloves will stay on. This is fair of me, right? I'm telling you what you did wrong, and I'm telling you the consequences. You are a threat, and you need to control yourself. Yumu was a threat. Yumu had never not been a threat, but her choices were her own, and right now, she was going to be someone's nightmare. Dad wasn't going to just memorize their faces. Dad was going to see their faces every day. He was going to see them graduate, he was going to see them open their agencies, get married, have kids, he was going to see them buy their first houses, sign the leases to their first apartments, cry over breakups, pull their wild pranks in the teacher's lounge. He was going to see them rise in the ranks, he was going to see all of it. He wasn't just going to memorize their faces. Yumu needed to move. Getting up into a crouch, she moved around the perimeter of the sprinkling of trees. She needed to move fast, but not too fast, relying on stealth over speed. She needed her moment. She needed to get in there. Slowly, the image of Dad broke through. He was moving fast, powerful, throwing men twice his size around like a 5-year-old throwing a fit with his toys. And okay, he was fine, but also Dad was not that strong. He was strong, yes, but not that strong. Hysterical strength. That was what it was called. He was panicking. When people panicked, they made mistakes, and Dad was freaking out. She caught him looking up at the stairs, trying to catch a glimpse of his kids, but they were gone. The mist man came back to the handman's side, and Yumu pressed behind a tree. There were muffled voices she couldn't hear from here, but she could catch vague half-statements. One got away, All Might isn't here, oh, so someone got away to get help, That was good. She hoped it was Tenya, threats of death, standard villain stuff. Hadn't the mist said something about killing All Might? Of course. Of FNG course, it was always All Might. What was Yumu expecting? Objectively, this was not exactly All Might's fault, but he was supposed to be here, they were apparently here for him, and now Dad was on his own facing down 40 villains. Move again. No one was looking in her direction. Yumu darted for a bush and there, she was closer now, she could hear what was going on. You really are a proper hero, Eraserhead, the man with the hands crooned. Look at how badass you are. But you're wasting my time. Behind them, Yumu caught the sight of blue water going white around the ship, and who did that? No time to worry about that, the man said Dad was wasting his time. That was a problem. No, Mu, bring Eraserhead here, the man ordered, and suddenly that black thing was moving. It was horrible. It was horrifying. Dad was fine 1 second, and the next he was on the ground, and Yumu's hands flew to her mouth to muffle a small scream. There were so many crunches. There was bright red liquid pooling, and she choked behind her hands. Her cursed, scarred hands. He was laying there. She couldn't even follow it, but he was just on the ground. Dad was on the ground. The man with the hands was walking forward, but Yumu was frozen in place, watching, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears shining, because Dad wasn't moving. The creature had a hand on his head, crushing it into the ground, and Dad wasn't moving. You really were cool, you know, the man said as he crouched in front of her dad. Her dad, hadn't he just came into her room last night to tell her good night? She could still see his powerful, indomitable silhouette in her doorway before he closed the door. The man reached forward and Dad's back heaved, like he was struggling to draw in air, and it was so fast, there was too much going on, Yumu hadn't even seen it. Dad was on the ground, there was blood, it was right under his eye. Was his eye okay? And then the man's hand wrapped around Dad's arm and his costume crumbled. Fingers touched Dad's arm, and his skin just turned to dust. No. And then the man looked up and let go of Dad's arm. Yumu's eyes followed his gaze, and there were her brothers, in the bushes, dripping wet, shaking uncontrollably, Azui next to them. Izuku's batons were gone, and they were watching in horror. Something clicked. It was like that same calm that washed over her when they told her that fateful day in first year of middle school. Her parents were going to kill her, and she said no. It was reverberating around her body. It was taking over her senses and she tensed in preparation, watching the man walk towards her brothers. Watch that gap between that creature and him widen and widen. Watch her window open wider and wider. No. The man reached for Azui, and Dad's head lifted. His eyes were red, shining red, and the man paused as his quirk did nothing. There was one target. One target, a clear path there, and that creature was about to be Yumu's. She tensed just a little more, and then she moved. Izuku hit the water hard. It enveloped him for a moment, and his eyes flickered erratically. Yumu got away. He wasn't entirely sure why it was important, but Yumu needed to be loose. Now he had to worry about drowning. One Izuku caught the sight of 2 batons sinking to the bottom of the shipwreck zone, and Izuku reached his hand over his shoulder for them, but, no, they were gone. He never even got to use them. How frustrating was that? Something was coming through the water directly towards him, and Izuku tested the strength of the thread. Too strong. Oh, awesome. He was about to get eaten by a shark, but oh, wait, no, here came Azui. Izuku kicked in the water, his hair floating in the depths, and Azui hit the shark, knocking him away, and a tongue wrapped around Izuku's waist, tugging him up as she kicked for the surface. They broke the surface and Izuku took a deep breath of air. Aki! He called in a panic. Where was Aki? Itoshi? Toshi! Aizawa is on the ship, Karo, Azui said. I saw Aki go through a portal with Kuda. Oh, awesome, he was now separated from his guide dog. This was going to be a beach to deal with. Where's the ship? He asked. It was all over the universes, left, right, in front of him, behind. He needed to preserve his strength. He didn't have time for analysis. Hold onto my shoulders, Azui ordered, and Izuku reached out as she kicked in front of him. His hands found purchase on her shoulders and she propelled them through the water. Izuku didn't remember the water being this cold, but then again, No one had ever let them go out this deep. He was shivering a little, trying to push down the panic, because Dad just went down there. Yumu was somewhere off around the worst of the villains and Izuku didn't even know why he told her to go right. There were so many things computed at once, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. Aki was gone, but at least Koji knew how to work with him and what commands to give him. Dad was out there, Hitoshi was on the boat, he was apparently in the water with a bunch of villains, he was soaked to the bone and he needed to stop freaking out and think. I need to figure out what to do. I need you to be my eyes to get me up on the ship, Izuku said as a full body shiver racked him. Alright, Karo, we're almost there, Azui replied and Izuku's eyes descended into flickering madness. First steps. Hey, Papa, Izuku said in the quiet living room. Yumu and Hitoshi were outside tossing the ball around for Aki, and Pops and Dad were both at work. How would I use my quirk in an ambush scenario? You're supposed to learn that at school, Izuku, Papa replied dryly as Izuku flicked through the Australian outback, whispering the stitch counts under his breath as his fingers felt along the stitches. Well, it's not like they're going to hire any analyzers anytime soon. You're the expert, Izuku prompted and Papa hummed. Your quirk is very different than mine, but if I had yours, the first thing I would do is check for injuries. The second thing I would do is check for enemies and make a list of their quirks. You're going to find yourself heavily relying on turning quirks against other people. Your fighting style is already about dodging attacks and preemptively avoiding them, so if you can figure out how to turn them on each other with your placement, you would be pretty set. Friendly fire will be your friend. Of course, I would hope you wouldn't get into any of those scenarios anytime soon. You'll have to get more practice with multiple opponents before you start descending into friendly fire opportunist attacks, though. For now, at your level, I would say stick to what you're good at. Izuku hummed and frowned, feeling around and frowning when he realized he put an extra stitch in the row. That was fine. He could fix that. Any reason why you're asking me about ambushes? Papa asked wryly and Izuku shrugged, ignoring the ticking at the back of his mind. Just a feeling. Like a quirk feeling. Izuku had never really lied to his papa. He'd never lied to any of his parents, not to their faces. There was the occasional omitting information, but never lying. But he couldn't really say yes. No. Just universe things. Seeing a lot of them lately, so I figured I could find something where I could learn from someone acting like I should. May take a bit to find it, though. You're at 2 hours now, so you've got a while. I'll let you know when you're at 4 hours, alright? Thanks. Izuku never did find it. He didn't tell Papa that either. Maybe he should have. Maybe he should have done a lot of things, like listening to the ticking in the back of his mind yesterday. Maybe he shouldn't have told Dad something was wrong 5 seconds before it happened. Maybe he should have told him when he first got the feeling. Maybe he should have paid attention to the way the threads were vibrating with the cadence of big event, danger, 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 pay attention to us, please listen. Maybe he shouldn't have brushed it off, said it could have been Katsuki, or an emotional danger, like the way they sang when he met Yumu. Maybe he should have done a lot of things, and maybe he should stop drowning in panic and regret now. Maybe he should focus on what he was supposed to be doing, which was finding his way out of the mess he'd made. Okay, reach up, Sasaki, Azui suddenly said and Izuku let go of her shoulders as his eyes flickered and flickered. Primarily mutant water-based quirks, nothing really to work with there. Hitoshi and Azui didn't appear to be injured, but he had to make sure they were on the left side of the ship, not the right, to minimize the damage when it started splitting. He wanted to push forward to check on damage, but they had to survive the next 5 minutes first. Izuku's hand found purchase on a rung and he hauled himself up. The villains were on their way, about to start surrounding the ship, and he needed to move. He needed to find a mutant emitter type. They were rare, but if he found someone Hitoshi could target, he could get them off the ship. He needed entrapment or scattering, and a way to get across the water. Click, 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 the threads hummed as he climbed up the ladder. Hey, Zuku, Hitoshi said from the top as Izuku neared them. Are we on the left side of the crack? Izuku asked immediately. Yes, but we need to stay here until we can move, Izuku said, and there. bouncing along the parallel threads. He checked the strength, made sure it was consistent, and yeah, it was. This would work. We're about to be surrounded. Hitoshi, you need to. Hitoshi's hand found Izuku's arm and Izuku accepted the help, letting him pull him up. Izuku clambered on board and found the railing, eyes buzzing brightly with purple. Thanks. Hitoshi, I need you to target the penguin mutant and tell him to use his quirk when you get him. It works if you. Izuku squinted on instinct, even though it did absolutely nothing, and tried to words Hitoshi was saying in that universe on his mouth. He repeated them under his breath, moving his lips, making sure the movements were right, rewound it a few times, and yeah, that was it. Ask if his wife is still enjoying his brother. But that's super rude. Even I wouldn't do that. You're actually telling me to do it? Hitoshi commented dryly. Hey Azui. Thanks for getting him here. Hitoshi was putting on airs, but there was a little tremor under his tone. Izuku could barely catch it, but it was there. He was scared. What a mood. Izuku was terrified out of his mind. What will his quirk do, Karo? Azui asked. He's going to freeze the boat and immediate area. You have to time it so they're all around the boat. We'll have a narrow window to run across the ice. Hitoshi, you gotta stick close to Azui. The cold's not good for her. She might slow down and you'll have to pick her up. They're going to try to break the ice and get out, but only a few will escape, and they'll still be stuck in their own little glaciers. Call me Tsu, Karo. Azui, no. Tsu, croaked, and Izuku nodded. Tsu, sorry. Keep close to Tsu. What happens when we get to land? Hitoshi asked and Izuku froze. He didn't want to look. He knew something bad was happening, and he didn't want to look. Not again. He couldn't do that again. He couldn't stop it, just like last time. He couldn't stop it. Bad things happened and sometimes Izuku could do nothing. He couldn't do it again. He couldn't look. No, he couldn't. Izuku, Hitoshi said softly and grabbed him by the arm and Izuku realized he had a look on his face. Is it like her again? We're just getting to land, Izuku whispered. Hitoshi's hand was shaking, and he let go of Izuku's arm. One step at a time, he agreed and there was a shift. Penguin is our target? Penguin is our target, Izuku confirmed with a confident nod he didn't really feel right now. Okay, Hitoshi muttered. Growing up with pros was incredibly weird, because all of Izuku's instincts were screaming at him to stay calm, but his body was shaking. When he was 9, freshly in Papa's apartment, he sat him down and went over the list. The list was what to do if someone targeted him for being Sir Nitai's nephew. Comply. Stay calm, try not to cry, violent people get violent when children cry, speak and answer questions clearly and do not ramble, remain respectful but composed as best as you can. If they ask you any questions about your uncle's work, you answer and you answer truthfully. If you need something, put asking for it off as long as you possibly can. It was all about complying and doing as you're told until you can be rescued. He couldn't do that right now. They weren't targeting them because he was Sir Nitai's son. They probably didn't even know. Everyone knew that Endeavor had kids, and that his son was in UA now. His agency had put out a statement about it, but Papa had kept it quiet. Pops had kept it quiet too. Right now, he was being targeted because he was a UA student, and he was being targeted because he could die and they wanted to make it happen. He was 15, it was his 3rd day of high school, and they wanted to kill him. Everything was out the window. All of the talks, all of the safety rules, all of the steps to take, all of the behaviors, because they wanted to kill him. They wanted to kill his dad, his sister, his brother, his friend, his dog. If they really wanted to get down to it, they wanted to kill everyone, and he had to fight. They're almost here, Hitoshi murmured, and Izuku tightened his hand on the banister. On my count, he said calmly. 1, 2. Not yet, not yet. He started the time at the wrong time. Now. Hey, you penguin F-. Hitoshi shouted. Your wife's still enjoying your brother? What the foo? Got him. Freeze the ship. Hitoshi ordered, and there was the sound of cracking and creaking as the temperature dropped drastically. The sudden change in air pressure made the metal of the ship groan and Izuku's eyes widened in horror as bolts popped out. Oh, he really needed to work around the audio problem. Move! Izuku ordered as shouts of alarm rose up, and his eyes flickered as he led himself to the ladder rungs. The three of them climbed down and Izuku broke into a dead sprint across the already cracking ice. The ship was creaking behind them, moving, and the ice was breaking. "Follow my steps. Don't let them go." Someone called and Izuku's brain flicked from the possibilities as the 6-foot-thick ice began to crack. Straight, dodge, left, right, shuffle to a stop to avoid a swipe. There was a crack ahead, he'd have to jump, smooth leap over the man right in front of him. Make sure you listen to make sure they're right behind you. Don't leave anyone behind, be a leader. Leaders keep moving but slow down to let people catch up. His heart was pounding in his chest as someone made a swipe at him and he dropped and rolled, coming to his feet. His thread screamed and Izuku jumped just as the ice split. The block of ice rocked dangerously, and now he was getting to the broken pieces. Half step back, balance it, jump, land with your gravity centered. They weren't far enough away yet for Tsu to take the water. "Hitoshi, Tsu, you guys behind me?" he called. "Yes." Tsu called and he heard the telltale click of chattering teeth. Okay, balance." That one to the left was about to break, he needed to go right. Izuku hopped, they were running out of ice now. "Center your gravity, jump, land, crouch down and stop the rocking," and that was it, they needed to swim now. "Can you handle the water, Tsu?" he asked over his shoulder. "I can stay awake," Tsu croaked and Izuku tensed before shaking out his jitters. It was just cold water. He flicked through his universes to make sure the path was clear, and, yeah, they were good to go. Izuku jumped and wow. He'd thought the water was cold, but this water was freezing. They needed to swim hard and fast. Weaving through his universes, he found the best path, and broke out into long BRST strokes. They were fine. Everything was fine. It was okay. It wasn't happening again. It couldn't be happening again. Then look, a traitorous, mocking voice in his brain whispered. "Look at what you've done if you're so brave." Izuku shut his eyes. Dad was on the ground. He was on the ground and there was so much blood. Izuku was frantically flicking through his universes, trying to find one where there wasn't blood, trying to find one where he wasn't being pinned by that behemoth of a creature, but it was all the same. It was like Mom. It was like Yumu. It was all there, right in front of him, and he could have stopped this. "Izuku," Hitoshi said softly. "Izuku, you need to control your breathing. It's getting loud." "Something felt wrong," Izuku whispered. "It felt wrong yesterday, and I didn't say anything. Is he bleeding?" "Izuku, we're with..." Tsu was right there. Izuku was trying to catch his breath. No, this couldn't be happening right now. He'd already lost Mom, this couldn't be happening. "You gotta breathe. Please, Izuku. Please." Izuku knew exactly what he was staring at. He knew what he was forcing himself to see. It was all red. It was also so red. "Dad," he choked out, and sheet, there was a classmate here, he just said it, but that was his dad. "Izuku, you got it, sheet." The man covered in hands was moving towards them in all the universes and Izuku froze. He couldn't help it. He froze. Dad was on the ground. There was nothing left he could do. Where was Yumu? Yumu was meant to be here, right? The man was saying something, and then he was reaching towards Tsu. His hand touched her face, but Dad's eyes were gleaming. The world was frozen at a single point, freezing cold, seeping into Izuku's bones, nipping at his fingers and toes, locking him in place, too terrified to even breathe. None of them could move. And then it happened. Yumu came out of nowhere. She was a blur of blue and gray and white, sprinting from her cover under the bushes at the menacing, hulking creature pinning their dad to the ground. Dad didn't notice her until the last second, wholly focused on shutting off Shigaraki's quirk as he grasped at Tsu's face. "You're so cool, sir." It was then that Yumu struck, her hands brushing across the monster before her and sending it crashing to the ground, entirely motionless. Her fingers latched onto Dad's jumpsuit as she rolled out of the way, pulling him with her and crouching defensively over him. "Yumu," Dad croaked. "I got you, Dad," she breathed as her they were so wet, black button eyes glared daggers at Shigaraki. "I just took out your pet. What are you going to do about it?" "Hacker," Shigaraki said, scratching at his neck vigorously. "She's a hacker. Kurogiri, they have a hacker." Perhaps we should retreat before reinforcements arrive, the black mist started to say, but Shigaraki cut him off with an unholy screech. I'm going to kill the hacker, he snarled viciously and lunged at Yumu, who crouched down, in a defensive stance, and Izuku saw red. It was like something snapped into place. Izuku's brain was completely clear, his ice-cold world igniting into hell flames screaming at him to FNG move. The fog that had descended on the boys was immediately dispersed, and Izuku yanked on his streams, flipping through the possibilities as Shigaraki moved for his sister. He had battered his dad around like a rag doll, and now he was going after his little sister? No, he didn't get to do that. Izuku charged out of the bushes, catching Shigaraki off guard and intercepting him mid-lunge. He stepped right into his path and his elbow went up, smashing into Shigaraki's nose with his back to his chest. There was an audible crunch, and Izuku slipped his hand down his arm to grab him around the wrist and flipped him over his shoulder. Shigaraki hit the ground with an audible whumph, the breath driven right out of him as Izuku felt red wetness seep into the fabric of his jumpsuit. Back off my sister, Izuku snarled. He should have done something, he should have helped Dad. Why was the line drawn at Yumu? Why did he panic? Focus. He needed to focus. Shigaraki howled and Izuku jerked his foot up and away as the air whisked under where his ankle had been. You know, I get the urge to hurt All Might. I do. He's annoying as hell to a guy like me, but if you, Izuku hissed as his foot that was hovering in the air moved back and firmly set itself in the ground. You thought you could touch my sister? I think he did think he could touch Yumu, but I don't think he thought anything through at all, Hitoshi drawled from behind him. Hey, Shigaraki, wasn't it? You shitty little hacker. Shigaraki snarled, evidently replying to Izuku, because Hitoshi couldn't get him. A dozen scenarios flickered through Izuku's eyes, and he sidestepped the warp that tried to open beneath him before dodging to the right to avoid a second gate. That's not going to work, he warned Kurogiri. That's not going to work at all. Hey, idiot, Hitoshi said sharply. Do you have any training at all? Why did you go against an unknown 5-point touch quirk when your own quirk is 5-point touch? Because Hitoshi had him, and now Izuku had to deal with Kurogiri. Get those children. Kurogiri ordered the few grunts left, and Izuku slid his foot through the dirt. Yumu, get him out of here. Izuku shouted, and his sister scrambled to pick up their broken and beaten dad, 3 sizes too large on her small little body. She would be useful right now, but their most useful weapon needed to be with the unconscious target. Dad was now entirely limp, and all of the things Izuku couldn't think of were flooding back in. This was fine. This was what he trained for. Tsu, help Yumu. Tsu leapt forward as Izuku's brain whirred through the different scenarios. When he had to win there. A fist came flying at him and he ducked, cursing losing his baton so soon, and captured the hand in his own grip before twisting, throwing the man far away before slipping to the side to avoid a devastating kick from a mutant type. There was a wet slap of Hitoshi's sopping capture weapon smacking someone in the face, and Izuku caught a roundhouse kick and punched directly up into the groin before wrapping his free leg around the only thing propping the man up and sending him crashing into the ground. Ignoring the pained yelp and subsequent groaning, Izuku grabbed on the nearest thread and yanked, grabbing the hand about to land on his shoulder before it made contact and using it as leverage to flip the man over his shoulder. He hit the ground and Izuku, saying if all to being heroic, smashed the toe of his boot right into his ribcage. They were being swarmed. All of the villains had minimal actual training, likely knowing what they did from scraps in alleyways, but sometimes quantity could overcome quality. Best case scenario, he and Hitoshi were going to get banged up. Someone had jolted Shigaraki. He was up. Izuku backed up rapidly. Give me back my Nomu. Shigaraki howled and Izuku grinned ferally. She's already gone. Your toy isn't getting back up, Ashi. There's no breaking out of Morpheus' trap. He didn't need to know there was a time limit. 30 minutes? They would have reinforcements by then. Danger screamed in a thread, and Izuku whirled towards where he heard Hitoshi shift. Toshi, what? There was a scream of pain and a cackle, and Izuku frantically flicked through the threads to figure out what just happened. No, not Toshi, what just happened? Get off me! Hitoshi howled and there was another crack. Shigaraki just got his nose broken again. He should have known they were above his skill level. There was another shriek of pain, not from Hitoshi, and Izuku didn't know what was happening. "Tosh, you okay?" Izuku asked in a panic, his eyes flicking around as he desperately tried to figure out what just happened. Was he looking directly at Hitoshi? He had no idea. He knew his pupils rarely dilated. Looking through parallel Izukus was like looking through almost drunk goggles. "Oh, he's blind," Shigaraki purred, and Izuku ducked on instinct at a shift in the air. What happened to Toshi? That was him screaming. He was losing control, fighting entirely blind, and he needed to snap back. The ring around his eyes flickered erratically and a blow caught him right upside the head. Izuku heard several cracks and pain exploded across his face as his jaw broke and his visor shattered, a piece embedding right beneath his eye, and another hit landed in his ribs with a crunch. Something snapped, and Izuku found the thread he needed. Not even thinking about it, he yanked out the shard of plastic stuck in his face and flung it. There was a slick noise of it cutting through flesh and a shriek, and Izuku ducked and rolled, the pain blossoming across his chest, and grunted in pain before swiping out with his leg to knock someone over. Millions of lives flickered before him, the threads fluctuating in strength a mile a minute, and Izuku's hand wrapped around a brick that had been knocked loose in the tussle and flung it with a satisfying thunk and crunch as it made contact with someone's face. Thank gods Kazan had started training them in an urban environment. His threads pinged, screaming at him that Shigaraki was almost on him, and Izuku flickered between 20 in the span of milliseconds before rolling backwards, out of range, and then dodged to the side as he came to his feet to escape Shigaraki's grasping hands. His hand wrapped around a wrist from a fist flying at him, and he yanked, as hard as he could, driving his knee into a gut and releasing so the force of the throw pushed them back. His leg swung straight up, almost in a split, and his steel-toed boot made direct contact with a chin. A thump, and his senses pinged again. Koji and Aki were almost here. Izuku shifted, avoiding another hit as tears of pain started to well in his eyes, and waited, patient, as his body went through the motions of dodge, duck, dip, dive, block, redirect, get them open, and now. "Aki, release!" He shouted, and white-hot pain exploded across his face. Oh, his jaw was definitely broken. A snarl cut through the air, and his dog, his brilliant, perfect dog, bolted forward, finally reunited with his partner. "Koji, go help Yumu." Koji had minimal self-defensive training, and while he could hold his own, he couldn't do it in a mob like this. He needed to get out of here. There were no animals to call on besides Aki. Izuku pushed the arm coming at him wide, and there was a crunch of teeth cutting through bone and tissue. A scream of pain echoed in the air, followed by a thump, Aki shaking the man's arm like a rope toy, dragging him along the broken cobblestone. Koji in the strongest threads took off at a run for Yumu and Dad and Tsu, likely to help them out, and Izuku blew a sigh of relief before focusing back in on the fight. "Switch!" Izuku ordered and shifted as Aki released his victim to dart to Izuku's side and launch himself in the air to protect Izuku's back, his teeth slicing through an arm's flesh to take down the man encroaching on Izuku's back. There was someone big and heavy approaching Izuku, and he dropped to one knee, back bent to act as a landing pad and springboard. "Aki!" He shouted, and Aki's paws hit his back, propelling him up to soar through the air to catch the man's arms reaching for Izuku, crunching down on his hand as he almost got Izuku. Momentum brought them down, and the man screeched in pain as Aki destroyed his hand and dislocated his arm with a yank of his head. F-. The man howled, and Izuku's brain pinged. Aki was about to get hit if he stayed, and Hitoshi was going to get hit if he remained unprotected. "Aki, Hitoshi!" he called, and Aki broke off, speeding towards Hitoshi to protect his back, sliding along the uneven ground to presumably, Izuku was pretty sure as one parallel Izuku glanced over his shoulder, get someone right on the inner thigh. That was going to hurt. The hulking behemoth of a man was up again, and he was said, "All right, Noodles, this is Daichi." "Hitoshi, how big would you say Daichi is?" "Big." "Great description, kid." "Daichi's FNG big." "Daichi, what can you tell these noodles about fighting larger opponents?" "Gravity's a bigger beach on me than it is on you. Use that against me. Throw me around a bit." Counteract my momentum and use it against me. Izuku saw the man close in, and he moved. This was the first thing Kazan had ever taught them about larger opponents. You couldn't pin them until they were down, so you needed to get them down fast. Izuku's hips shifted, and he slid through the ground to shoulder-check the man, back to his chest as he tried to grapple him. Right in the solar plexus. Kazan would be proud. The arms closed around him even as he drove the man's breath out of his chest, and there. A weakness. When you were winded, your strength went down, so his arms were too loose, and Izuku had milliseconds. He slipped his arms underneath the arms encroaching on him in an X, and pushed out, breaking the grapple before it landed, and then his hands moved to grasp one arm. Another slam of his shoulder, right in the same spot, and he was throwing the man over his shoulder as his legs slid between his to brace himself. He was heavy, but off-balancing him gave Izuku just enough leeway to lift him. The man was driven into the ground as his slick blood coated Izuku's hands, and it was then that reinforcements arrived. Not the pros. No, the temperature suddenly dropped dramatically and there was a boom that shook the world, and the sound of someone soaring through the air to crash into the ground in a limp lump. Die! Katsuki hollered and Izuku let out a snort. His senses told him Hitoshi was near, and he smelled like blood. Hitoshi, what happened? He asked, fighting through the pain as he dodged another hit, backed up, dodged a second, and clucked briefly. Aki charged forward and got the guy by the back of his leg, and Izuku drove a punch right into his face, feeling bone and cartilage crunch under his fist as he broke yet another nose. He got my elbow, Hitoshi replied, and Izuku hissed under his breath. Did you break a rib? Yeah, he replied and reconciled with the fact that it was only adrenaline that was allowing him to talk right now. He was bleeding a lot. He was pretty sure his face was drenched. Izuku, watch out! Katsuki yelled and Izuku almost jerked at the shock of hearing that nickname from his lips, but he dodged all the same as his threads pinpointed the danger. Izuku got inside the man's guard and drove a knee right up into his groin before smashing an elbow uppercut into his chin. Aki! Izuku shouted, and there was a feral snarl as Aki latched onto the man behind him, yanking his legs from under him so Izuku could step back and drive his heel into his face. There was a loud boom that shook the building, and suddenly an echoing crash reverberated around their glass prison that knocked Izuku onto his butt. His eyes flickered erratically, and holy shit, there was too much strain on his brain at this point, and it was, I am here. All Might's voice shook the building and Izuku painfully gritted his teeth. Great. Just great. They were going to escape before someone could take them down now. Kurogyri, Shigaraki said, and Izuku's ears tuned in on the scratching. Get me that girl. We need the girl. No. Katsuki howled, and explosions shook Izuku's world as he flung past him, in pursuit of Kurogyri before he could warp away. Izuku flicked to the strongest thread he could find, and Katsuki just whooshed through a plane of mist. He missed. Kurogyri was already gone. Why Mew? Hitoshi shouted and Izuku swung on his back leg. There was a drop in air pressure, and a muffled yelp as Yumu fell onto the cobblestone on her butt. Yumu, don't wake it up. Izuku yelled and Shigaraki moved behind him. Izuku turned in the direction of his noise, and Sheet, the strongest thread, screamed that he was reaching for Kirishima. Izuku pushed his quirk to his limits, and there were 2 seconds before All Might impact. Shigaraki would have Kirishima in one, and Izuku had a narrow opening. Scooping up a brick, he hurled it right where Shigaraki's wrist was, knocking him off course, and he surged forward to grab the injured wrist and pull Shigaraki forward to drive the heel of his hand into his solar plexus just as All Might made impact. Kurogyri, get us out. Shigaraki howled, and danger pinged in Izuku's senses. He released Shigaraki, pushing him back, and latched onto Kirishima instead, yanking him back and away, sending him sprawling out of range of the warp gate. They were gone. They were gone, and there was a crowd of villains left in their wake. Where was Dad? Get out of here. All Might ordered, but his voice was strained. Izuku's eyes blazed and he scoffed under his breath. Gods, he hated him. And he was late. He was late, and Dad was f'd up, Izuku didn't even know the extent of the damage. Yumu had been targeted because she took care of the monster made to kill him, and Hitoshi's arm was missing half of its skin. Danger pinged, alerting Izuku to Yumu as a thread vibrated in warning, and he dove into the scenarios as he twisted, and well, that was a bad move on that villain's part. There was a crash as the man went down into a nightmare, and Izuku's lips painfully twisted into a smile. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Guys, we gotta get out of All Might's way, Kirishima said as All Might presumably sent villains flying. Aki nudged Izuku in the direction of his classmates and he conceded. It was All Might's FNG job to begin with. The crowd of students jogged for the stairs, and it was then that Izuku finally realized that he was bleeding out of a hole in his face and in a hell of a lot of pain. His breath started to come out in a pained wheeze, and a wet body slipped up next to him, propping him up. "You're effing injured, Aizawa, let me get him," Katsuki said, and Izuku's eyes started to ache. He didn't even know how many universes he went through and the rate he flicked through them, but it was a lot. The time streams had been a mess. A strong arm wrapped around Izuku's side and Katsuki picked up his arm and slung it over his shoulder. Izuku tried his best to ignore the weirdness of the whole thing. "He needs a BLD," Yumu said as Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. There were too many villains everywhere. They were too spread out for All Might, and more were starting to converge for the exit. "We need to get out of the way," Izuku said as he opened his eyes again and slipped through the scenarios. "There's about to be 2 indiscriminate attacks. Present Mike and Miss Cannon are coming." "Who?" 3BS homeroom teacher, Izuku rasped. "She's retired. We need to get out of her way." There was a gunshot, followed by a screech of pain, and Izuku cast about for opportunities. "Side of the stairs, move now," he ordered. That would at least put a buffer between Pop's shout. He was going to be said when he saw Dad. "Just listen to him," Hitoshi ordered, and the group of Izuku slipped again. Right, 6 students shuffled to the side of the stairs to hide in the bushes. "Katsuki, turn off your hearing aids," Izuku said, and Katsuki shifted next to him, awkwardly switching off the hearing aids. "Yihia aha." Just in time. Pop's voice drowned out the screams of pain as Izuku clasped his hands over his ears, his ribs screaming at the lift of his arm. How had he even managed that fight like this? The yell shook Izuku's very cells, and oh, Pops was very, very mad. "Sweetheart, bless your heart, if you needed to express your anger, you should have just asked me to show you." Cordelia's voice drifted down and Izuku shook in mild excitement. The faintest American accent, that southern drawl. "She was said and they were fed." The air rumbled and heat exploded across the building as Cordelia called up her signature move, Meteor Shower. Massive fireballs rained down, utterly destroying the plaza and surrounding grounds, shaking the world around them, and Katsuki hitched a breath. "What the F dash?" he hissed as men went flying in every direction. The fireballs dissipated on impact, so no one really got burned badly, but the aftershocks were breathtaking. "She was number 1 before All Might," Izuku said distantly as the pain started to overtake him. "That's so manly," Kirishima hissed under his breath. Izuku was on good authority that it was a sight to see. Katsuki whistled under his breath. "They're said." Izuku choked out a laugh as the rumbling finally came to a stop. His eyes were squeezed shut tight. He really needed to limit the amount of universes he bounced through next time. There were just too many variables, and his head was aching along with the rest of his body. "Is Aki okay?" Izuku asked. "I covered his ears," Katsuki replied, and Izuku's brows furrowed. He really had grown up. This was weird. Katsuki tried to help Izuku up, but Izuku crumpled as the pain just overtook his whole torso. It was blinding. How badly had he been hit? He thought it was just one broken rib. "Sheet," Katsuki hissed, and there were shifts next to him. "Izuku, reach forward." Izuku blindly reached forward and found Katsuki's shoulders. Hands slipped under his thighs and Katsuki hefted him up. Izuku went boneless against his back, trying to ignore the pain as tears leaked up into his tightly shut eyes. He could feel his blood smearing all over Katsuki's bare skin. It hurt. His entire face was on fire. He had to be swollen. "We're going up the stairs now," Katsuki said, and Izuku grit his teeth against the Jolting. There were running footsteps towards them, and that had to be Pops. He was freaking out. Izuku! Sheet Hitoshi, oh my gods boys. Suddenly, hands were pulling Izuku away from Katsuki, and that was it. The pain was too much. Izuku couldn't hold on anymore, and unconsciousness took him away. Toshinori knew he shouldn't be at the hospital. He knew he should be searching for answers, but he was never really good at that sort of thing. Previously, he was just pointed in the vague direction of where to land a hit, and he did it. Actual hunting for the culprits was left to underground pros, intelligence pros, pros who were a little more well-rounded than him. He was out of time, anyways. None of the kids had ended up in the hospital beyond young Aizawa and the Sasaki boy, and he had asked Naomasa if he could accompany him to get their witness statements. Coming into USJ had been a hot mess. The villain covered in hands had a broken nose, the Nomu was on the ground, Aizawa was broken into pieces, being hauled up the stairs by Kuda, the Sasaki twins were clearly worn out, Aizawa's son had a massive missing patch of his skin on his elbow, just like his father, 13 had a literal hole in their body, and the Sasaki boy had a broken jaw, a slice under his eye, and a couple of broken ribs. It was a mess. They should have never been hurt in the first place. And Toshinori had been busy playing hero. Toshinori, Naomasa said suddenly as they strode down the halls. Do you want to do this? Of course I do, Toshinori replied quietly. You should prepare yourself, then, Naomasa said carefully. It's messier than it seems. I think it already looks like a mess, Toshinori responded. I can't see how it could be even more of a mess. Right? Naomasa agreed awkwardly as they reached the door that housed both Aizawa's son and the Sasaki boy. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. Tell me what? Toshinori asked, and Naomasa slid open the door. Oh, it could be so much worse. Toshinori was frozen. Young Aizawa was sitting up in bed, his arm wrapped in bandages, propped up against his chest in a sling, and Sasaki was curled up in the sheets with a BLNDFLD on. His visor had been broken, nearly lodged itself in his eye, and there was a patch of gauze just along his cheekbone covering the stitches. The dog, Aki, was on the bed, pressed against the curve of his legs, head propped on his hip. The Sasaki girl was sitting in a chair in the corner, knees drawn to her chin, eyes locked on her phone, and young Aizawa was arguing with the only adult in the room about going to see his father. Papa, I need to go see him, Yumu got to. I can walk just fine, he was saying, and Toshinori's wide eyes met Sasaki Mirai's own gaze. Out, Sasaki said bluntly, tone dripping with venom. Get him out of here, Tsukachi. What? Sasaki, the boy, asked sleepily as he barely perked up, and Toshinori found his mouth was utterly dry. Mir, he croaked. Sasaki. The boy had a sight quirk. What was his given name again? It was Izuku. Inko's only son. How could he have forgotten? How could he have forgotten Mirai had a blind nephew? He had given Mirai the loan to get Aki to begin with. Mirai had transferred the remaining funds into his account a bare month after getting set up with his agency, and that was the last time he had ever made contact with him. How could he have forgotten about the nephew Mirai did nothing but talk about? This was Izuku. Little Izuku Toshinori knew from second-hand stories about his exploits, his quirk analysis, his drive, his wild plans and possible bullying and how did he not know? Oh, get him out. Mirai spat and Toshinori took a step back, eyes wide. All Might's secretary is a part of the investigation, Night Eye. You know I can't do that, Naomasa said passively. I don't care. You can interview them on your own and give his secretary the paperwork later, Mirai snarled. He was furious, glaring at Toshinori with all the rage of a protective father, and Toshinori's brain connected the dots. Young Aizawa had called him Papa. The boys were placed in the same room like they were family. All three children had a frightening amount of synergy together, as if they were raised together, and there were allusions to them all having the same trainer. The entire staff knew Yamada and Aizawa were married. Young Aizawa called Aizawa Dad, and Yamada Pops, outside of class with no qualms, but it had been 3 days. 3 days of school, 2 of class, But hadn't Aizawa had all 3 kids hanging around during break, before the semester started? Wait, weren't all 3 kids learning under Nizu the semester before the year started, before Toshinori officially started? He could have sworn someone mentioned something about it. He'd never seen them on his visits, but there was the occasional mention of them. Oh gods, how did he not know? Mirai was romantically involved with Aizawa and Yamada to the point where their son called him Papa. He had 3 kids. He had gotten 3 kids in the time Toshinori had been estranged, and he was wearing a ring. Right there on his left hand. Toshinori had been late, and Mirai's sons and apparent husband had ended up in the hospital. What had he done? Perhaps in front of the kids is not the best time to make a scene, Naomasa said carefully. Fine. Toshinori, let's take a walk. Mirai came to his feet and Toshinori shrank back, a kicked dog, and Mirai set a glare from the depths of hell on him. Tsukachi, wait until we get back to start asking questions. Shoyuta is still unconscious, so don't go bothering him. I can wait, Naomasa said guiltily. Mirai stalked forward and grabbed Toshinori by the arm, dragging him out into the hall and towards the stairs. Mirai, don't call me that. Mirai snapped and whirled on Toshinori the second they were far enough away. What were you thinking? I just got caught up in hero duties and… Hero duties are for when you are on patrol and on the clock, Toshinori. Mirai snarled. You are a high-profile figure, the FING symbol of peace, and you are now publicly attached to vulnerable children and have a set schedule to adhere to anyone with a teleportation quirk can find out about. It was just a few hours, Toshinori protested weakly, and Mirai peeled his lips back in something very similar to a wolf showing its fangs. You know it's never so simple, he hissed dangerously and advanced on Toshinori. You think you can just show up like this? I didn't realize they were yours. I would have… Toshinori hadn't seen him in 6 years and Mirai was spitting mad, a raging mother bear, and hadn't he been crying the last time Toshinori saw him? Heartbroken, left alone in that hospital hallway as Toshinori walked away? There was no rage in him last time, just a tired, hurt, broken acceptance, and Toshinori had done this. You would have what? Showed up to get to know them? Mirai snapped. Tried to apologize? Put hero duties aside for once in your life because you felt responsibility? Or is that your way of acknowledging that you knew you shouldn't have done that this morning? Or will you just play clueless as always? No, I wouldn't have come to the hospital. Toshinori's voice almost raised to a shout before he backed up, glancing around carefully to be sure no one heard. Mirai stared at him in disbelief before huffing out a laugh. You didn't even put 2 and 2 together, he said, utterly blown away. I talked about Izuku every time I had a phone call with Inko. Every time. It was all over the news when she died and you didn't even remember her name? You gave me the loan for Aki and you didn't even recognize a unique quirk like Izuku's? But I honestly thought you didn't care, but this is actually worse. What happened to Inko? Toshinori asked in bewilderment and Mirai choked on a laugh. I can't do this with you. I cannot be, and since when did Mirai cuss? Do this with you right now. You were late, and now one of my husbands is still unconscious from surgery, completely wrapped in bandages, and my sons are in the hospital, and my daughter has a possible hit on her. I told you one day you playing the hero was going to ruin my FNG life, but now you had to bring my family into it. I didn't even know you had a family. Toshinori protested and Mirai glared at him with all the venom in the world. And I think today proves why you didn't deserve that privilege, he spat. Get out. Go wait for Tsukachi in the car or whatever you were going to do. I don't care. Interact with my kids in class, but stay the hell away from them otherwise. Toshinori was floundering. Mirai was so angry with him, but wasn't this what Mirai said would happen? Toshinori would continue to put heroics ahead of everyone else in his life until someone got hurt? Toshinori had really gone out of his way to prove him right today. A sorry was caught on his tongue, but looking into Mirai's blazing angry eyes, he knew it was most certainly unneeded and definitely unwanted. And so, like a kicked and scorned dog, he backed away and made his way for the elevator. Mirai was right. Why was Mirai always right? Slow and steady steps led Toshinori to the car, where he found himself opening the door and just sitting down on the seat, feet on the pavement as he stared at the asphalt in silence. 6 years. 6 years of only hearing of Mirai from news segments and pictures on magazines and merch in hero pop-up stores. 6 years of nothing but hard, cold silence, with Toshinori ignoring anything and everything to do with Sir Night-Eye. His back had been to Mirai. He remembered being terrified to look over his shoulder and seeing the look on his face. His voice was breaking, he recalled. Mirai rarely cried, and when he did, Toshinori could never stand to look at him. He couldn't say he never loved Mirai. He couldn't even say he still didn't love him, but Mirai had 2 husbands and 3, possibly even more children. Toshinori had no idea if he had little ones running around. It wasn't like they couldn't afford them. The blatant hostility in their first class with him made sense now. Toshinori was used to kids with quirks that were commonly the target of bullying, hating him, of course, and Aizawa the senior hadn't bothered to try and hide his distaste of him. But their concentrated, directed irritation with him had felt personal, and now he knew the truth of it. They had raised good points, of course. He'd done as much reading as he could, of course, but he didn't have a degree. Most of the UA teachers got them while they were teaching, but many started halfway through their degree. A good chunk of them, like Midnight, Present Mike, and Eraserhead, were actually told at graduation to start working on their degrees. Of course, Aizawa's kids would seem more comfortable teaching than he was. Of course. Given their obvious experience in martial arts, they probably had taught younger children at some point or another. They could probably take over the DMN class. Toshinori only had practical experience, and his practical experience was going to look extremely different than theirs when they got out in the field. After all, he rarely had to even fight. He could just walk up and end a fight with a flick of his finger. These kids, though? They were going to have to actually work for it. Of course, Mirai's children would be wrecking ball. Of course. They were on an entirely other level. Years of martial arts, a cool head in a crisis, able to make split-second decisions in the heat of combat, able to prioritize and make the correct decisions to ensure not only their survival, but everyone else's in the heat of combat. Toshinori used to think about children with Mirai during nights where he especially hated himself and wanted to torture himself. In a way, he was always terrified of Mirai. Because he loved him. Because he never wanted to hurt him. Because of what Mirai represented. Toshinori was a man in a cage, and Mirai was the world outside of it. The cage door was opened, but Toshinori had lived for so long in a cage he simply couldn't escape it. The very idea was horrifying, because it was within the cage that Toshinori had use, had worth as a human being, and once he left the cage, he had to redefine that worth by his standards, not what the cage said his worth was. Toshinori, ultimately, was drowning, and Mirai was offering a hand, but he simply couldn't take it because the water was his home. He wanted to love him. He wanted to be with him, but when he heard his voice broke, he realized that he did not deserve him. Not as he was, and Mirai was walking away. Stupidly, Toshinori had thought that if he had a successor, maybe he would be able to stop. He would be able to breathe. He would be able to be himself. He had taken on a duty, and he had to see it to the end. With the death of All for One, he had nothing left. His purpose was fulfilled, but he wasn't ready to redefine that purpose. He knew he wouldn't be able to change overnight. For months afterwards, he would wake up and think, tomorrow, I will be the man Mirai deserves. But he never took that step. He pushed himself to the limits his body would allow, and then he would stop. The Hero Commission would call him, and he would go. It didn't matter how much he was hurting, it didn't matter how much blood was decorating his toilet, it didn't matter how many pills he had to swallow down just to be able to move. The commission called, people needed him, and so he would go. Some days, he could imagine Mirai's disappointed gaze on his back. He knew exactly what he did. He knew what he told Mirai, he knew what he said when he told him he would continue. He knew that he told, I would take death over you. He knew how he'd failed him, but at his heart, Toshinori was a coward. It wasn't that he didn't love Mirai. He knew Mirai would take care of him, take him to appointments, make him tease to soothe his stomach, hold him on nights when the pain was too much to bear. He knew he'd happily go to the pharmacy for him, talked to his doctors to make the best possible meals he could that Toshinori could stomach. He could imagine the little notebook even now, full of recipes and lists of ingredients that could at least help. He knew. He knew Mirai would stand by his side, no matter what. He also knew that ultimately he decided he was not worthy of Mirai standing by his side. If Toshinori wasn't All Might, then what was he? What right did he have to be Toshinori when Nana couldn't even have her own child? What right did he have to love when all the successors before him died so he could finish the job they started? If Yagi Toshinori was not the symbol of peace, then he was nothing, and Mirai had said that he was someone. And Toshinori simply couldn't take it. And now Mirai wasn't just Sir Night Eye. He was husband. He was love. He was honey. He was Mir, to someone that wasn't Toshinori. He was Papa, he was father, he was home. Some days, Toshinori imagined that he would one day be enough for him. He imagined he would be worthy of that unconditional love. Those were the days where he pretended he hadn't been too scared to look back, to face what he was letting go, to watch it slip from his fingers. Those were the days he pretended Mirai's voice didn't crack when he whispered, "I will never be enough for you." Those were the days where he imagined that he turned around and said, "I want to be enough for you, and I can't do that right now." Those were the days where he pretended he wanted to see himself as Yagi Toshinori, as the man that had everything, the man that deserved what he had. Those were the days where he pretended there was a chance he could love Toshinori just as much as Mirai did. Those were the days where he pretended he ever had the desire to work on himself as a human, and put the hero aside to believe that he had worth beyond all might. But Toshinori was nothing more than a title he carried. Symbol of Peace was his name, All Might was his name, and Toshinori was little more than a shell that kept moving and did its best to keep up with the demands of what it meant to be a pillar. Mirai had everything Toshinori had ever wanted with him, and he had it with someone else. And because Toshinori let All Might take the reins once again, he had almost destroyed that. How strange. There was a glisten of a wet drop on the back of his hand. It was salty, it was warm, and it had come from him. Another drop, and the full reality of what he had lost hit Toshinori in the face. The very thing he had avoided for so many years was back, in his chest, pounding in his heart, and not for the first time. He considered what his life would look like if he wasn't borderline suicidal with little to no desire to change. He loved Mirai. He was always going to love Mirai, and it was only because of that that he was happy for him. He was so happy for him, and it hurt. It hurt because he wanted that with him. Mirai had gotten what he deserved, and Toshinori had been back in his life via his children for a grand total of 3 days and almost wrecked it. His children had saved his husband, their dad. They had to deal with that fallout, they had to piece themselves back together, and Toshinori could do nothing but stay far, far away. He'd done this to himself. He knew he'd done this to himself. Mirai had watched silently for years as he ran himself to the ground, listened to his offhand remarks where he demonstrated just how little he cared about his own life, loved him and loved him and loved him, believed that one day Toshinori would put him first by putting himself first, and Toshinori had failed him. He had failed him because hero came before human. That was the price of his soul, and he had sold it when he ate that hare. He had sold it with every call he answered in the middle of the night. With every week he continued on no sleep, run to the ground and continuing on. He sold it with every time he gave up on the people in his life to save the people who hadn't made the decision he'd made. He sold it and sold it and sold it until Toshinori and All Might were indistinguishable. And he had prayed for a child. He couldn't even be Toshinori. How was he supposed to be dad? Those nights of pretending he was anything but himself were over now. They had gone some time ago, but they were well and truly dead now. He had done this to himself. As always, Mirai was right, and as always, Toshinori was living in a delusion just so he could live with himself. Toshinori just prayed that he could smile with them. Mirai's smile was one of the greatest things he had ever been given the privilege of seeing, and he knew in his heart that Aizawa and Yamada deserved to see it. Wiping at his eyes, he took a deep breath. Aizawa was alive, no thanks to Toshinori, and Mirai would be okay. He had wonderful, sharp, loving children with a petty streak a mile wide that would carry them through and spines of steel. He had Yamada, who Toshinori had no doubt was a wonderful and doting husband, and Aizawa, who was the best person Toshinori could think to raise children with. He had a home, and a support system, and a family that would love him unconditionally. He didn't have it with Toshinori, but that was okay. Because he had it, and Toshinori wasn't going to feel sorry for himself and his own choices that led him here, because Mirai wasn't going to be anywhere if he wasn't happy. He was happy, even if he was angry with Toshinori right now, and Toshinori was going to accept that and be happy for him. He always did deserve better than Toshinori and his broken body and litany of health problems and complete lack of self-esteem and self-love, and he got it. He wasn't trapped. He was free. Mirai was always meant to be free as a bird, and Toshinori was so happy for him. Papa came back in, and he looked entirely too composed for Yumu's tastes. She hadn't even known All Might had a secretary until just now. Papa had never mentioned him, but then again, Papa didn't mention anything at all pertaining to All Might. Lot of rage there for someone just being a secretary, but adults were complicated, and she was hating that they were making more sense as she got older. In the meantime, she was preoccupying herself with damage control. Sue had given her number before they were all whisked off in the ambulances, and Yumu had to deal with this before it got out. And hopefully not have to tell her dads. In reality, she had been putting this off. Her hands were shaking, her heart was hammering like a woodpecker drilling a hole in her chest. She was barely managing to stay calm in front of her brothers. Whatever possessed her to run out there could have bothered to stick around. She had been completely calm, a cold burning anger that made her brain perfectly clear, but now she was a jittery mess, intentionally sitting out of the view of the window and insisting on the curtains remaining shut. Papa had let her take over the corner, and she was wrapped in a blanket. Her hands were still hurting. She didn't keep track of the people she put down. Once Koji showed up, she had just handed Dad off and ran forward, darting here and there to knock people to the ground and leave them there like trash on a beach. After so many years of being terrified of her quirk, of refusing to use it, it was like something snapped. She just used it and used it and used it on total strangers. Before, she had decided that as a hero, her number one priority was to just use it for a second, 5 minutes tops to get someone restrained, and then release them. There were no restraints. She couldn't go back to release them. They were trapped for the full 30 minutes by the time everything was finished, and they were in the direct line of fire from Pops and Cordelia. Cordelia knew how to angle her fireballs to never hit a prone person on the ground, but Yumu had just left them there. It felt so wrong, so inhumane. She had the power to wake them up, and she didn't. What would her parents' co-workers think, finding the leftovers of what she'd done scattered all over the ground, staring in horror at things no one else could see, letting out odd choking noises of pain and terror, their only way for calling for help? She couldn't think about that right now. She had to think about her family, and she had protected her family, and she was going to continue to protect her family. Yumu pulled the shock blanket just a little more tightly around her shoulders and stared down at the open chat on her phone. She hadn't sent the message yet, but she needed to. Apparently, Izuku had freaked out and let it slip too, so they were all FANG up today, it seemed. Sasaki Yum Emu. It's Sasaki. Sasaki Yum Emu. The girl. Not the boy. Yum Emu. Or Yumu. Yumu is fine. She locked her phone and let her eyes slide shut. They were saying she was suffering from quirk exhaustion. That sounded about right. Her hands were encased in compression gloves, only allowing her thumbs free to type, and it was helping a little. They gave her painkillers, but she had really downplayed the pain levels. They were still burning. Not so much that she couldn't move, but she was definitely uncomfortable. She really didn't know shit about her quirk. She had used it less than 10 times in her life up until this point, and the majority were accidents. There was no endurance. It had no training, and it wasn't used to being used. Yum Emu. The detective was talking to her. He was quiet, calm, crouching in front of her. Yumu just pulled back a little more, wrapping the blanket more firmly around herself. He apparently knew Papa. That was why he was sent over. Can I get your statement? Yumu stared down at the linoleum tile. It was hideous, really. Did she even want to talk about this? She had to. This was a part of the process. You got attacked by villains, you gave a statement. That was how it worked. Okay, she said softly. Thank you, he said and just sat down, cross-legged on the floor. What did she look like that he felt the need to do that? I have to give a disclaimer. My quirk is a passive quirk, called lie detector, and I will be able to tell if you are lying or not. Is that all right with you? Yeah, Yumu said softly. Okay. Papa. What is it, Yumu? Papa asked softly. Do you have to be in here? Do you not want me to hear? Papa asked from his chair, looking like he wanted to get up and move, and Yumu weighed the pros and cons. Papa probably already saw the footage, and if he didn't, Pops had and would have told him about it. So, objectively, it would be pointless to kick him out, and she wasn't sure she could keep it together if he wasn't in here. It's fine. You can stay, she whispered and then looked down at the detective with his little pad of paper and the recorder on his phone pulled up. I'm ready. Recount your retelling of the events as best as you can, and I'll ask questions when you're done. Yumu nodded slowly and took a deep breath before she launched into it. She tried to stay calm, keep her voice even and level, and shove any and all emotions out of her mind as she told it, but her tone was wobbly at best, and she knew she sounded rough. Her fingers were wrapped tight around the edges of the blanket she'd been given and she kept her eyes trained on the recording app on his phone, watching the minutes go by as he made notes on his pad. Truth, 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 all with their times marked. And then we got into the ambulance, she said, and wow, was she already finished? Well, thank you, Yumu. Can I ask you a few questions now? He asked quietly and she slowly nodded. Please answer verbally for the recorder. Yes, she murmured. Thank you. When the villains initially entered, do you know what was said? Something about All Might. I wasn't. I couldn't hear that well, she replied and he tilted his head. Was there a blast affecting your hearing? No, I saw Dad go down the stairs and I couldn't hear anything. I don't know. I couldn't see him around. That missed man and I panicked and it was just noise until I remembered Izuku told me to go right. And you stated that you threw yourself over the banister? Yes. I hit the tree on the way down and took a minute to catch my breath. And then you went along the tree-line? Yes. I wanted to be close enough to help Dad, if I could find a moment where I could, she replied, slowly, a little fuzzy at the thought of how crazy that was. What was she thinking? That ledge had been at least 6 meters high. And do you know how many villains you managed to get with your quirk? I didn't want to keep track. I think. My thoughts right then are a little, it's fuzzy. Was she keeping track in the moment? Like they were trophies? Was she enjoying it? Did she like it? She didn't remember. All she could remember was red, because Dad was red everywhere, and she needed to get him somewhere safe to put pressure on the bleeding. Her hands were hurting, though, after she took down that thing and maybe, for men? She couldn't remember. She remembered some kind of sonic boom coming at her, and dodging and slapping the man. The whites of his eyes were so bright, so wide as he choked and stared at her from the ground. His lips had been parted, and the bottom 2 front teeth were just slightly crooked and Dad was... She needed to stop. She needed to stop thinking right now. But all I could think was I needed to get a tourniquet on Dad and it was all... Yumu, Tsukachi said softly and Yumu darted her eyes up to look at him for just a brief moment before looking back down. It's okay. You were panicking. Everything was marked truth. He had nice handwriting. Very clear and legible. Can you state your quirk and what it does for the record? Morpheus Trap. 5-point touch quirk that requires skin contact to put the subject in a state of hallucinatory paralysis. It lasts 30 minutes or until I touch them again. And Morpheus Trap is entirely non-lethal and you understand that it is non-lethal? Yes. What was that question about? She watched as he neatly made a note that Sasaki Yamimu ensured that all actions were non-lethal in defense of herself or someone else. There were laws about that for minors. Panic quirk usage laws. He didn't make a note that it was for a family member, and there was another stone in her gut as she realized that in the eyes of the law, Dad wasn't family. He didn't count. It could be effectively argued in court, due to them living together and him taking care equal parts of her needs, but it had to be argued. It wasn't set in stone. Dad didn't count to the world, and she had to text Sue. Tsukachi caught her reading and cast her a small smile. It's not going to go to court, don't worry, he reassured her. You are on school property, in an area where quirk usage against other parties is allowed. You're fine. It's just for the records. Okay. Alright, I don't have any other questions for you. Interview with Sasaki Emu regarding the USJ attack by the League of Villains ended at 4:47 p.m., Tuesday, April 7, 2146. Tsukachi stopped the recording and Yumu stared at the red button before wiggling back in her chair. We're done, she asked softly, and Tsukachi looked up at her. Just, I interview a lot of people about a lot of terrifying events, he said gently. Your reaction is natural, okay? Everything you did was incredibly brave. You didn't do anything wrong. Yumu nodded slowly and looked down at her pink phone case, studying the smooth, rounded lines, the way it clung to her phone, the ridges, the small crack at the corner of her screen, the little Cinnamoroll keychain attached to the top right corner. Tsukachi climbed to his feet and Yumu unlocked her phone, opening her texts and reading Tsu's response. Azuitsu, hi Yumu. Azuitsu, are you and your brothers okay? Azuitsu changed their name to Tsu. Tsu changed Sasaki Yumamo's name to Yumu. Yumu, sorry, I was giving my statement. Yumu, Hitoshi is awake. I took a nap, but I woke up a few hours ago. Izuku is asleep, but everyone's out of surgery. Tsu, I see. Yumu, they're supposed to be mostly healed up tomorrow when Recovery Girl can heal them again. We should be discharged soon. Dad's supposed to get out tonight too. Tsu, shouldn't he be kept overnight? Yumu, everyone knows you cannot tell a conscious underground pro to stay the night in the hospital. It just doesn't work. If they're not on a ventilator in the ICU, they're fine. According to them. Yumu, and he gets mad at Papa for fighting with hospital staff. So, you told me to not tell anyone you called him Dad. May I be blunt? Well, that was concerning. Yumu, sure. Tsu, you and your twin do not look remotely related, and your quirks are not similar in the slightest. Your family is very confusing. And Sir Night Eye is not confirmed to have children. Yumu looked over at Papa slumped over in his chair, forehead propped on his fingertips, and snuck a quick picture. Yumu, well, he's definitely here, and it's incredibly complicated. Attached .jpg image. Yumu, Izuku and I are not related by blood. Biologically, he is Papa's nephew, and was adopted at 9. I was taken in at 12, adopted at 13. Both of us are pro-fosters, and Izuku's father is infamous for killing his own wife, among other things. His mother was Papa's only sister. Hitoshi is a pro-fostered. Dad is only 30. Papa hid us from the media for a variety of reasons, most of them that just got blown wide open I can't talk about. Legally, Dad is married to our pops, present Mike, which is why I asked you to not say anything. People are generally open-minded, but some can be extremely judgmental about polyamorous relationships, and get even nastier when the grown but adults who can make their own choices have kids. Yumu, so, basically, please don't tell anyone. 3 men taking in 3 abused and vulnerable kids and raising them all together would be bad in the media. Extremely bad. I'm sorry for our mistakes that brought you into this. You shouldn't have to deal with it. Tsu was typing for a very long time. Yumu watched the dots go and go and go and cursed herself for messing up so badly. Izuku she didn't want to blame, but Yumu wasn't supposed to make mistakes like that. Giving up on waiting for her to reply, she switched over to her other messages and started to text Mei. Yumu, we're going home soon. Mei is mad. Everyone okay? Yumu, yeah, we're all okay. Izuku and Hitoshi should be healed up tomorrow. Mei is mad. What error code was your communicator giving you? Yumu stared at the message and her heart fell a little. Her hands were burning. She was tired. Her nap was not enough to make herself feel better. Anne Mei was going to be spiraling tonight, but not enabling her would only make her worse. Yumu, there was no error code. It was just beeping, like a missing child alert, and then it'd stop until I pressed the button again. Mei is mad, so it was blocking all radio frequencies. Maybe a Faraday cage quirk? The electric components inside were still working, they just weren't going out. Okay, I can work with that. Yumo, I'm probably not going to run into a quirk like that again, May? May is mad, that doesn't matter. Just means I have to figure out how to break a Faraday cage from the inside. And get 2.0 visor working right. It's still clicking when it moves up. Yumu stared at the words on her screen and swallowed harshly. May was a mess. She knew in her gut that May was a mess. She seemed perfectly calm and composed, but it was when May was calm and composed that you should worry. She was having a meltdown, and she only knew how to work her way out of it. Yumu, I guess these are the last texts I should be expecting from you for a while? May is mad. Yumu, okay. Don't stay up too late, okay? We have a few days off. May is mad, it's getting finished tonight. There were a few texts from Tsu and Yumu just sighed softly at the message on her screen before switching back over to Tsu's chat window. Tsu, I'm not sure why you're apologizing for being upset that your dad was almost dying in front of you. Tsu, I won't tell anyone. It's no one's business, anyways. Yumu, thank you. I'm just a little out of sorts right now is all. Tsu, well, half of your family is hospitalized. Tsu, and the leader of the villains that attacked us tried to kill you specifically. Tsu, and you had to protect your injured and unconscious dad. Tsu, objectively, I think today was slightly harder on you than most of our class. Yumu stared at the messages in silence and twitched for a moment. That was right. It had been an actual mess, and for her family, it had been a nightmare. At least she was getting a friend out of it, maybe? She wasn't sure. Yumu, doesn't mean it wasn't hard on you. Are you okay? Tsu, I'm okay. Mom is trying to get me in with my therapist right now. My little sisters don't really understand what's going on, but they're trying their best to comfort. Tsu, attach.jpg. It was a selfie of Tsu with her hair in very messy, haphazard braids that were more clips than hair, throwing up bunny ears at the camera with two very small identical chameleon girls sitting on either side of her. She had little twin sisters. That was actually adorable. They looked like they were maybe 5 years old. Yumu wanted a little sister. Yumu, they're adorable. I'm stuck in a family of men. Only have my aunts for girl time. Tsu, how many aunts? Yumu, counting Midnight, who I'm pretty sure will eventually marry Auntie Aika? Though one of them is only 19 and doesn't really count as an aunt. More like a cousin. She's in Italy right now. Tsu, doesn't Present Mike have a younger brother that's a hero? Yumu, tranquil. Kitaro, to be exact. He's his only brother. For sisters, one brother. We don't get along with him very well. Tsu, he seems to have a bit of temper, from what I've seen. Yumu, yeah, but you should meet Auntie Botton. Pops and Auntie Aika are the most easygoing out of all of them. Tsu, I've got a lot of aunts and uncles too. Yumu, we don't actually have any on Dad and Papa's sides. They're all from Pops. Present Mike. Dad is Eraserhead, Papa is Sir Night Eye. There was a new message from Auntie Botton and Yumu flicked back over to her messages. Auntie B, are you okay? Little you, I'm okay. Izuku and Hitoshi are supposed to be fully healed tomorrow. Auntie B, okay, what you meant to say was that you are physically okay. Little you, my hands hurt a little. Auntie B, it's all over the news, don't go on social media, okay? Little you, already avoiding everything on Twitter. I know it's a mess. My DMs are blowing up. Auntie B, mute it. Auntie B, need anything from me? Little you, I think I'm okay for right now, but Papa is with us and not letting us around Dad because he's still unconscious and wouldn't want us to see. Pops needs someone? Auntie B, I've been texting him. Hikaru is on her way over. Another text from Tsu, a text from Kichi, her phone was still blowing up. Another text came in and Yumu squinted at the push notification at the top of the screen. Kitaro? Really? Yumu, Kitaro texted me. Auntie B, he's a sheet, but he's a sheet that gives AF dash. Let him know you and the boys are okay, if you're willing to talk to him. Yumu's relationship with Kitaro was touch and go at best. Over the years he'd spent at Shiketsu, he'd gotten easier to deal with, But for the most part there was a degree of suspicion there, and it was even worse for her brothers. They weren't fans, that much was clear. He was a great hero, a little rough around the edges, and probably not the best uncle, but he was trying, on occasion. Pops had welcomed him back with open arms, but Pops was their sole forgiving influence. Dad and Papa were definitely believers in pettiness and grudges. She could text him right now. Yamada Kitaro, what the f happened? Not the best opener, but she'd take it. Sasaki Yum Emu, a mess. Yamada Kitaro, is everyone okay? The news is just breaking. The news was breaking, and there were already reports that there were 3 ambulances on the scene, and rumors that someone had died. It had to look bad. Sasaki Yum Emu, no one died. Izuku and Hitoshi got hurt, and Dad he's unconscious still. But Izuku and Hitoshi are slated to be healed up by tomorrow, and Dad will live and didn't lose his eyes. So we're fine. 13 is okay. Yamada Kitaro, did you get hurt? Sasaki Yum Emu, no. Just some scrapes from jumping off a ledge and quirk exhaustion. Yamada Kitaro, you did what? Sasaki Yum Emu, there was a tree. Yamada Kitaro, how high was the ledge? Sasaki Yum Emu, let's not talk about the ledge. Yamada Kitaro, please tell me that was the craziest thing you did today. Sasaki Yum Emu, that was the craziest thing I did today. Yamada Kitaro, that wasn't the craziest thing you did today, was it? Sasaki Yum Emu, it was not. Sasaki Yum Emu, but I got a new blanket out of. It's so small wins. Yamada Kitaro, shock blankets are not things you win. Sasaki Yum Emu, how did you know it was a shock blanket? Yamada Kitaro, I'm a rescue hero? Yamada Kitaro, is Aki okay though? Yumu took a quick picture of him curled up against Izuku, head still propped on his hip, and sent it. Sasaki Yum Emu, he's good. Attached.jpg. Yamada Kitaro, why does Izuku have gauze on his eye? Sasaki Yum Emu, just under his eye. His visor broke and got him like 2 inches below his eye. Also did not lose his eyes. He yanked the piece out and threw it at someone. Yamada Kitaro, he did what? Sasaki Yum Emu, he also threw like 2 different bricks. Went a little nuts. Yamada Kitaro, what did you do? Sasaki Yum Emu, let's not talk about what I did. Yamada Kitaro, NVM Zashi just told me. Please don't charge at something that can break your spine like a toothpick until you like. Graduate. Maybe. Just don't do that again for a while. Sasaki Yum Emu, it worked. Yamada Kitaro, apparently. You guys don't go back for a few days. I'll be in Mustafa the day after tomorrow and be there for a few days. Let me know if you want to do something or need something. Oh, a text from Auntie Hitaru. There was so much going on, and Yumu's phone was dying. Auntie Hitaru, be there in 10 minutes, bringing you a new stuffy. Yumu, I am not the one hospitalized. Auntie Hitaru, it's not like Shoyuta wants one. You're getting a stuffy. A text from Tsu, a text from Kichi, another text from Auntie Botton, and that was it. Yumu was going to Tumblr and muting her texts. Papa, can you let everyone know I'm okay? She asked quietly, and Papa looked up from his phone. Are they blowing up your phone? Yeah. I'll let them know you're taking a break. I grabbed a charger for you. Here. A long arm extended to hold out a charger for her, and she grabbed it. There's an outlet to your right, Papa said, and Yumu leaned over to plug in her phone. Dad should be waking up in an hour or so you should be able to see him in a bit. Hitoshi, Yumu, do you two want burgers for dinner? We can pick them up on the way home. Can we get MS? Hitoshi asked. He was curled up, facing them, now silent as he scrolled through his phone with glazed-over eyes. Yeah. We can do that, Papa replied, and Yumu looked over at Hitoshi with pursed lips. He was high as a kite, and shouldn't be on his phone. I need to get your prescriptions from the pharmacy. Will you be all right for a few minutes? We're okay, Yumu murmured quietly. Do you want something from the vending machine? Ui oka, Yumu replied. Sounds good, Hitoshi said distantly, and she eyed Aki in the bed with Izuku. The nurses hadn't even bothered with separating the two of them. His hero vest had been removed by Papa and thrown over the sole empty chair, and his civilian one was still at school. His veterinarian had actually come to the hospital to check him over and declared him just fine, and the second his little exam was done, Aki was back in the bed with Izuku. Papa got up and drew near to Yumu to press a gentle kiss to the crown of her head. "I'll be right back," he promised and left the room with a kiss to Hitoshi's head. Hitoshi let out a weird, distant noise, and Yumu set her phone to the side and got up to go to him. "Hey," she said quietly, and his purple eyes flicked up to her. "Hey," he replied, and she stood over his bed for a moment before looking over at Izuku and Aki snuggled up together. "You okay?" "I want to see Dad. He'll be up soon." "Okay." He had been arguing a little while ago, before the nurse came back in and checked his pain levels before clearing it with the doctor to up his morphine drip while Izuku was half conscious and being interviewed. It was apparently akin to a third-degree burn, almost a fourth, and he was in a lot of pain. It hadn't directly affected his bones or tendons, but his nerves were entirely wrecked. They didn't want to leave him unhealed, there was just too high of a risk of infection, so he was basically going to be unconscious for the next 2 days. Izuku had more injuries, but Hitoshi's was worse. Meanwhile, Dad had the same injury on his arm, and his forearms and humerus and shoulder blade were shattered. And his face. It was completely busted. It would take a while to heal. There was just so much. Yumu paused, reaching out to rest her hand on his warm, unbandaged arm. "Do you need anything?" she asked softly, and Hitoshi's glazed-over eyes met her before he scooted back in the bed and laid on his back. Yumu set down the rails and carefully pushed aside all of the lines hooking him up to medical equipment before she climbed in with him. For a long, long moment, the two of them laid on their backs, their sides pressing together, staring up at the ceiling in silence, only broken by the beep of the heart monitors and their steady breaths. "We almost died," Hitoshi said softly. "But we didn't," Yumu replied. "But they didn't. And that was what mattered."